check out Cajun Lights, your complete dog hunting outfitter. Tracking equipment, leashes, collars, dog supplies, and much, much more. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. And don't forget their outstanding lineup of lights. You can find it all at CajunLights.com. Elite nutrition products are the hottest thing on the market right now for dog and horse owners. And Houndsman XP is a dealer. You can find all their products on our website at houndsmanxp.com. Over the past 5 years, you've tuned into this podcast, and I don't take it lightly. We have built a mutual trust. And when I recommend a product, it's because I believe in it, I use it, and I'm given my seal of approval for that. I'm putting my name on that. And with Elite Nutrition products, I do trust it. I do use it. I've seen great results with their essential dogs, their pre and probiotics, their tick-borne disease treatment. It's all natural. It's a great alternative to pharmaceuticals when used appropriately. If you expect extreme performance, you need Elite Nutrition. Available from houndsmanxp.com.
Hey everyone, since this is close to a 3.5 hour episode, I just figured that since there were just so many different awesome experiences and recollections that I could choose from to make a teaser like I usually do at the beginning of these episodes, I just decided, like I've done a few times, to just go ahead and not do that and jump right in here. This episode has been one that's been a long time in the making. There's been a lot of people over the years that have requested me get an episode with this guest, and until recently, with the help of a few fellow falconers and mutual acquaintances, Rob Rainey being a big one. So, thank you again, Rob, for helping to get this connection and help make this happen. Amongst others, this is finally happening. So this episode is, once again, episode 200, and also another milestone episode for me in that this is 2 years since being out on my own with Falconry Chronicles, since separating from Falconry Told, and year 7 of doing this podcast. And I purposefully waited to put this episode out and make it my episode 200 because this is another special one, in my humble opinion, that I'm very happy and excited to get out to you all. This episode is a perfect example of why I continue to do this podcast, and even though I'm still partially on the fence as to how much longer and just how much in general I'm going to be able to continue to do it, that's a discussion for another time. But this episode is a huge reason and another perfect example why I feel like this has been an important mission to continue to pursue. So thank you all so much for helping me over the years to pursue that and accomplish all this content. Without a lot of you all's help, it wouldn't have, and also support, it wouldn't have been able to be possible. It's one thing to be able to have the drive and the energy and just the wherewithal to be able to continue to do an endeavor like this, but it would be just insurmountably harder without a lot of y'all's help. So thank you again so much for that. But enough of all of that. Once again, this episode with Ken Riddle is one definitely that I'm going to forever be proud to be able to present to you all. Just so you all know, Ken does have about 75 years of falconry experience and knowledge and a very long life story, and getting that all into 3.5 hours is very difficult, as you can all imagine. So please keep in mind that there were some things that will need addressed and clarified due to chronological details and accuracy, which Ken is going to do with me in a follow-up episode, so you have that to look forward to. And in that episode, we'll also cover additional insights and stories and other experiences too, so I just wanted you all to be aware of that. All that being said, I'm very happy to present to you for this milestone episode 200, Dr. Ken Riddle. Thank you all so much, and here we go. Ken, I am very excited to do this recording with you. Believe it or not, I am going to just throw this out. You are probably one of 2 or 3 falconers that I've actually gotten the most requests for to do one of these with. I don't know if that will make you feel flattered or cursed or whatever you want to feel or whatever you want to do with that piece of information, but I just wanted to say, thank you very much for agreeing to do this. I know you like to kind of keep yourself to yourself and everything else, but thanks so much for having me, and I'm glad that you agreed to do this.
All right. Well, thank you, John. I would imagine these other falconers or other people have requested my interview, probably because I am pretty quiet about my activities in the past. I usually fly my birds alone, although I've been very active at different times in my life with other groups of people. But anyway, a lot of people have twisted my arm, including Robert Bagley and Robert Rainey and others. So anyway, now we're here. So.
Yeah. Well, that's just so everybody knows who to go ahead and throw the stones at and blame, I guess, right? In case this doesn't turn out just like they want, right?
Exactly.
No, this is going to be great, though. Whenever you sent me over all the notes and the outline and stuff for your basically your life, I was looking through this stuff and I was just like, man, I really hope that we can, manage to fit this all. I mean, I allotted today just for you. And then, of course, after we're done here, I got to, head out to Oklahoma and get to the rest of the weekend with all those folks too. But I wanted to give as much of today as we could to you and your story, because as we were talking about earlier, 75 years is an insane amount of time to think about it. Literally a whole lifetime and longer than a lot of people live, let alone have a storied, history in this. So, this is a lot to cover, but I think we're going to be fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, it is a lot to recover. So, it took me a while to put it all in chronological order, but it was important. Otherwise, I get the stories mixed up and times mixed up. But going back to the, 75 years ago from today, roughly, I was 10 years old and basically a dreamer in school. And so my teachers had complained to my mother a number of times, and so they finally sent me to the detention hall, which in our little school was a library. And during that time, everyone else was out playing soccer, but I was in there sitting there, supposedly studying math and English. And fortunately for me, the librarian went to lunch during that time. So we had an assistant who came in and just paid attention to what she wanted to instead of watching me. So I hid in the library in the back of the room down at the bottom shelf. I started there, and it just so happened that was a collection of National Geographic magazines. So every day I would hide back there and started out with the first one, which I think was back in the late 1800s or certainly early 1900s. And I would flip through every page. Well, the earlier ones were basically black and white and not that interesting pictures, although occasionally there was something interesting. But I didn't read anything. I just looked at pictures. I would turn the picture in every page and then go to the next one. When I got to the 1920 issue on Falconry, the Sport of Kings, it set me back, and spent days and days dreaming and looking at the pictures and reading every page. I didn't read anything on any of the others, but that one I read everything a number of times. And the die was cast at that point. I was always interested in animals, snakes and frogs and birds and things like that. And that's why I was dreaming probably. But anyway, that launched me into basically a lifetime of falconry. I had no idea that those pages would become a living pattern for me to follow. But anyway, that's what happened in terms of my introduction to falconry. I was 10 years old. So after that, it was probably 2 or 3 years, it was pretty much no information coming in on falconry. I did finally find the Craighead Brothers books and Weekend with the Prairie Falcons and a couple other things, but it was all limited. And my mother was really helpful, although she kept saying, well, better go back to math and English instead of paying attention to birds all the time. But she did sew a rafter hood on the sewing machine. I still have it. There's no way it would fit a bird, but we did that. But anyway, looked through Outdoor Life magazines and Sports Afield and that kind of thing. And in the back of those books, in those days, there was little advertisements about different things. You could buy maybe a slingshot or, a knife or something like that. Well, anyway, I found this one that was an advertisement from Hecht Bookshops in St. Louis, Missouri. And Hecht Bookshops had mentioned that they had falconry books. So I wrote them, and they sent me a little list and price list. And the cheapest one on there was $1.25. It was Observations of Modern Falconry by Ronald Stevens. So I got that one. I read that one. I don't know how many times. I still have that same book. But that, of course, there were no pictures or anything in there, so you had to kind of imagine what they were saying. But then after that, I started writing Mr. Hecht on a routine basis, asking questions about falconry. How do you make a hood? How do jesses fit? How do you put the leash on it? And so finally, I guess he got tired of my questions, and he sent me a little kind of a nasty note. I said, look, I'm not a falconer. I sell books. He said, but there's a man that lives in your city there in Tulsa, Fred Castler, and he seems to be a very knowledgeable falconer. Question him, So my mother called him, and I think I was 14 at that time, and we set up an appointment to go visit him. I went there, and it was really an eye-opener. He had a Passage Tiercel peregrine that he had just trapped with Colonel Meredith, and it was sitting on a screen perch. His office was a veritable falconry office like mine now. I mean, it had pictures, and he had a work desk there where he made cannon hoods, tooled leather cannon hoods, and he made bells and swivels. He was a great guy, and he was also very conservative and a member of the Falconry Club of America, and all of the things that those people preached all the time about conservatism and non-commercialism and ethics and all these kind of things. So I idolized this man, and ended up, learning everything I needed to know to go forward. And he helped really establish a really good group of Oklahoma falconers there through me, and then later other people who came together. So that's kind of my start into falconry up to about the age of 15.
Nice. That's what I was getting ready to ask you. So, what was the age span for all of this to kind of culminate and come together? You said roughly 9 or 10 to 15, something like that?
Yes. And then so for the next 2 or 3 years, I associated with Fred. He was a member of the Tulsa Audubon Society. He did a lot of conservation oriented talks to the Audubon Society and other groups, Boy Scouts and all these kind of things. And I helped him on some of those. And then I went into the Air Force at 19 after flunking out of school because I spent all my time chasing birds and hunting rattlesnakes. But anyway, I ended up at Fort Worth Carsville Air Force Base, and that was in 1961. So by that time, I was, pretty close to 20, and joined the NAFA, and that launched me into a big arena of other known falconers and addresses and contacts. And so I met Dan Slow, who at that time lived in Waco, and then later he moved shortly after that to Corpus Christi. And Dan and Fred Kassler became good friends through me. And so I spent I think in 1961, I spent my fall in Corpus Christi trapping peregrines. And that was another big turning point. We caught 15 birds that particular week, and we kept all of them in the house and in the yard during the day, and then worked at them at night, picking out a bird, and then on Saturday we banded all and released them. It was a thrilling time for me. I ended up catching several peregrines in headsets with my hands, which were incredible experiences.
Well, and just out of curiosity, from that like 15 to 20-year-old, age gap, was there anything in particular that was just briefly, touching on that? I mean, was there anything kind of going on during that time span too? Or?
Yeah, I mean, they were both basically really, especially early on, they were poor falconry experiences because of, inability to figure out exactly how to do it right. So I had broadwing hawks. I had all kinds of owls, screech owls, barred owls, gray horned owls, which I've trained and flew on the golf course. That's the only experience I've ever had on golf courses was with owls and other hawks. But I had some experience with gray horned owl catching rabbits at night. So I was about, I think, 17 or 18. My next door neighbor had a Jeep, and we would put my gray horned owl on top of on the windshield and slowly drive through country roads. And with lights, the owl could fly out and chase, and we caught some rabbits with that bird, which was pretty interesting because owls, in my opinion, are pretty stupid birds. I mean, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't.
Sure.
But I guess the first real success I had with falcons, well, I had a red-tailed hawk too, which I hunted, but with poor results. But my first real success was with a peregrine I trapped in 1961.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious, as opposed to, I mean, and in the middle there, sometime or another, did you end up, either going back to school, getting your, GED or anything like that, or completing a different route before you kind of officially went into the whole other avenue of things? Or,
well, like I said, I continued to pretty much avoid studies.
Yeah. Okay.
And my mother complained all the way up until, I was, even after I was in the Air Force, all the time telling me, quit fooling with these birds, and do something important in your life. It's just a waste of time,
Little did she know, right?
Yeah. So as a result of that, many times I've given talks to school children and groups, and I've always told them that, in my opinion, the thing to do is if a person becomes really passionate and interested in a particular subject, you should encourage them, unless it's dangerous for them or something, something that's going to cause harm. But otherwise, you never know what it would lead into. So if it hadn't been for falconry, I probably wouldn't have amounted to anything, But I got interested in medicine because of Fred Kassler's bad experiences with bumblefoot. He'd lost a gerfalcon. When I saw him that time, over the next couple of years, he had a peregrine with a real bad bumblefoot. And I got involved in trying to figure out what was wrong, how to treat it. And I decided then, really, in the back of my mind, that I was going to figure out a solution, and ended up actually making a major discovery in my mind, anyway, and my handling of bumblefoot by a bird that I was actually flying prairie chickens, and I had a bird in perfect position over a prairie chicken, and just before I got to the flush, a meadowlark popped up and flew to the fence line quite a ways away. The bird broke her leg on the top wire, and so as a result of that, the bird had to stand on one foot, and I kept it in my room at college, and on a pillow, which she would fortunately lay down, which probably saved her life. But anyway, she developed this pressure necrosis on the good foot, and then it got infected. And so anyway, I went to the vet school. That was before I actually got in veterinary school, and I talked to the surgeon there, Dr. Bosrab, who was a very famous surgeon, and said, look, I think we need to remove the infective material in the necrotic tissue and try to sew it up. And he said, well, this is something that's, not typical treatment on an infected wound. But anyway, he did what I wanted him to do, which is pretty interesting. But anyway, we saved that bird's life. So
it's kind of the aha moment for you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. But anyway, that was until after I got in the Air Force. I mean, I was pretty much not a student of anything except falconry,
Sure. Well, fair enough. I'm just, like I said, there's so much to cover, and I'm, if we're gonna like really highlight most of these periods, I'm kind of trying to fill in the blanks as we go a little bit here too.
Okay.
But no, I mean, this is great so far. But so, going back to, then, you joined the Air Force, and you're kind of progressing from there. That's still roughly what, age 20 at that point, you said?
Yes.
So go ahead and pick it back up from there.
Okay. So I did a lot of meetings with various falconers, Thomas Miley, and then E.W. Healing, which is from Texas, and Dan Slow. And we did quite a bit of peregrine trapping on the coast. Tom Smiley gave me a Cooper's hawk, which was my initial interest in falconry. I mean, I was hung up on the concept of flying a short wing and a Cooper's hawk. So anyway, I had a fantastic experience with this bird, catching over 20 quail and a couple of small rabbits, and the bird was perfectly trained. I mean, it was a great experience. About along several years after I started there in the Air Force at Carswell, I was approached by Harold Webster to possibly be moved to the Air Force Academy, and I met with he set up an interview, and I met with a captain in the Falcon mascot program in Dallas on a football game day, and right there he said, okay, we're going to send you to the Air Force Academy to pick up on the Falcon mascot program and help those people.
All right. And so whenever you were kind of put in charge of that, I mean, what I can imagine there's probably some hurdles that came with that. Probably wasn't there? There
were some big ones for me because, falconry was like a religion to me. So I was always, wanting to do it correctly. So I was an airman second class, working with cadets, and we had a captain who was on, and him and the other cadets basically were interested in the football games and cheerleading. We had 21 falcons at that time, prairie falcons, peregrines. We had an adult gyrfalcon, white gyrfalcon, Athol was her name. And so it was my job to help the guys learn how to handle the birds, how to fly them to the lure, and had been being done already, but to continue the program. And I found they were paying very little attention to what I had to say, and at the same time, I was supposed to go out and get some young prairie falcons to take out of the nest, so they would have some young ones to start. Just, I guess these were just birds that they could learn on, new birds, for the new cadets, which I did once in terms of getting the young prairies. Then shortly after that, I had one bad experience where the falconers didn't follow through with their normal safety protocol, and they let a windbreak panel, which is a heavy plywood panel windbreak in the weathering yard. They forgot to lock it up, and a big windstorm came in and killed 2 birds. Yeah. So that was really bad. And then shortly after that, they spent some time. Well, the Fort Carson climbing team spent some time one day on a Saturday pitonining up the cliff face of the Peregrinery on Gold Camp Road, and took 3 eyases there, which we didn't need, and that really disturbed me, because actually that was the last time those birds nested on that cliff. It was a big 450-foot flat iron type bluff. Then almost immediately I got orders to travel with the Air Force Academy to Greenland to bring back 3 white gyrfalcons, because the Air Force had saved these 3 Danes from drowning out in the Arctic there somewhere. And so the Danish wanted to provide these birds, for the Air Force Academy in return. So at that point, I just I decided, well, I don't want to be a part of this. I mean, we just have way too many birds, and they're not being managed, and the resources not being utilized in the right way. So I wrote a letter to the base commander, basically saying I'm resigning my position, which caused quite a stir in his office. But anyway, they did then send me back to the hospital there to work in surgery, where I was actually trained as a surgical technician. So, which was actually probably a pretty good thing, because shortly after that, the nurses talked me into going back to school and applying for veterinary medical school, which I did, and that was a good turn in my life. I mean, Mother was happy after that.
I was going to say, I'm sure she was probably happy with the turn of events for you. But I mean, real quick too, I forgot that I wanted to ask this also. So how many other falconers were you actually responsible for training or trying to be in charge of whenever you were in charge of the program? At
the Air Force Academy, there's like 6 cadets there.
There's 6? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure how many different, quote unquote falconers there were supposed to be, that were kind of, and how many, what was like roughly the total number of birds that you all were trying to manage and keep track of?
I don't know what the full number was that they wanted, but I mean, we had 21 prairie falcons. Then I got some other eyases, and we got the 3 peregrines, eyes peregrines, and then we already had an adult gyrfalcon, and 3 more. So that's like, I don't know, 27 or 8 or something.
Yeah. So in other words, too many for like 6 or 7 people.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was just a collection of birds,
right,
which were being mismanaged.
I gotcha. Yeah. No, I can understand why that would weigh on your conscience and be frustrating.
I think it was actually that probably ruffled some feathers, because soon after that, they Harold Webster and Jim Anderson and some others got busy, and they finally got a veterinarian in charge of the program. And now I think it's probably a really good one. They don't even fly the birds at football games anymore because they would fly off sometimes, and so.
Interesting. Okay. Well, so yeah, you got reassigned then. You went into, basically from there you decided to go into the pre-vet program. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead and just pick up from there then.
Okay. At Oklahoma State, I took a Passage Peregrine with me there, but I kept it at several months, and then I gave it to my friend in Texas, Dan Slow, because I knew I couldn't handle a bird and shouldn't be handling a bird there. But because I had the bird with me and the fact that I joined the Wildlife Society, the first year I went there, I gave a talk on falconry, and lo and behold, Steve Sherrod and Mike Brewer, two young college students from OU, basically, came to that talk. I don't know how they found out about it, but anyway, that was a very interesting meeting because those two people helped kind of form a group which continues to be, I'm really proud of Oklahoma falconers who actually hawk and hunt their birds and do it in such a way that it's an ethical, artful practice of falconry, and basically it just set the stage to follow up Fred Kastler's practice of falconry, and we basically cultivated this kind of practice of falconry through all the years, and had very few people come along who were anti ethics, so we had some scoundrels from time to time, but anyway, a good group of hawkers in Oklahoma.
All right. So yeah, the foundation basically of the state club, essentially.
Yeah,
and
right.
Okay. And so about how many would you pretty much go straight into vet med, like whenever at the start of all that, or was there still like a year or two gap or so in there, or?
There's a year or two gap. So I got in with 2 years of pre-vet work, and I had straight A's, and also I worked as a comparative anatomy instructor part-time, and my falconry was zero. I mean, I associated with Mike and Steve and some of the others, but then later, after I got in veterinary school, our group became a lot more active, and I actually took a peregrine my last year, and turned out to be the best companion I ever had in falconry. But anyway, we spent a lot of time on weekends when we could hawking not sand grouse, but prairie chickens and ducks and rabbits, and with some success. I mean, it was a good time.
Yeah, so you're still able to get your fix during that time at least, yeah.
I got a big fix because I had had some experience on Padre Island hawking ducks with Dan Slow, and in that style there, because there are always some wintering peregrines on Padre. This was out on where the National Seashore is now. We would hawk ducks on little sloughs back in the island, and the style that he employed was a bird going up 100 feet and flushing the ducks, and the bird catching the ducks on the rise. To me, it became boring real fast, and I didn't appeal to me. So when I had been in the Air Force, living there in the Black Forest area, it was a fantastic place for thermals. In fact, they had big thermal airports there for people with gliders. They would take off and fly hundreds of miles. Anyway, I started having some success with thermal flights, and I decided because of the style that could be afforded through these thermal flights, that this is what I wanted to focus on. So when I got this passage birds in 1971, I think it was, Libra, I concentrated solely on training the bird for thermals. I mean, I would go out and fly at the time of day when I knew it could catch a thermal and bring it down. That bird turned out to be the best one I've ever had. I mean, as a passage bird, I mean, it would stay up over an hour and a half, maybe closer to 2 hours. I mean, I didn't time them, but I mean, 2 hours could go by. But incredible multiple stoops from, out of sight or altitude, and I flew that bird for 1 year, and then I left in '72 to do a residency at Yerkes Primate Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and I left her with Mike Brewer, who also had the same idea in terms of the flying style. He loved thermals, and also he flew a lot of ducks on grain fields, but they were different types of flight. But anyway, he kept her for, I was there 2 years, and finally I got her back and continued with the same kind of style for the rest of her life. She stayed with me for 13 years. And some incredible, I mean, unbelievable flights with that bird. She had, Mike lost the hood when he kept her and never could get a good fitting hood. And as a result, she would bait like crazy when you tried to put the hood on. So when I got her, I mean, I could hood her, and I did that for a number of different times, but I thought, well, this is crazy. I mean, I'm making my bird crazy, to just get her ready to go to the field and then expect her to perform like I want her to. So to solve the problem, I would set her in the back seat on my little Volkswagen bus and drive 18 miles to a place where I had a section and a half of land. And she would run back and forth on the back seat looking out of the window. She never hit the window, never tried to fly to the front or anything. It was amazing to actually watch her on the way to the field. And of course, I was always nervous because I was afraid that something was going to happen. So I would drive as fast as I could there. And when I would get to the place to cast her off, I would just pull to the end of this little lane that went up between two fields and jump out of the car and open the door, and she would fly out and take off and hit a huge thermal, every time. It was, but I already had the telemetry on her and everything. That was in days when we did have telemetry, and finally, and I would take my receiver with me, and a lot of the time I had no idea where she was except for the direction of a signal coming in. You couldn't see her.
You're one of a handful of guys that have shared interesting stories about how they've had to kind of manage and keep birds, like either on the way to or coming back from the field or whatever. I've heard some quirky stories about, obviously, different accipiters and things like that they had to do special things for or whatever. But that's the first time I've heard something like that with with Falcon. That's pretty
It was
funny.
really unique. I mean, the bird was not you wouldn't call her well manned. I mean, she wasn't, just a little docile bird sitting there. I mean, she was always high strung, and I actually built a muse out on the back end of my property, right on the edge of a pond in shaded area with grass, and like I'd gone to Germany earlier and spent 6 months, and I picked up on these A-frame shelters that you can put a bird in, and it can, stay inside, and it can jump out on the leash and take a bath and jump out on an outdoor perch. So she would molt back there just fine. Otherwise, every every year, she would get really nervous in the fall and spring. So, and, it was surprising that she would ride in the back of a car like that unhooded without damaging or breaking a feather or something.
Right. Yeah. Causing a 50 car pile up for
Right.
you. Right. Yeah. Well, and so getting back to the timeline of things here, then, like, as far as, I mean, how many years then did it take you to kind of work your way through, the vet program, and then, like, what was your kind of progression from there?
I worked through, the vet school was 4 years. So during that time, I had this one peregrine, and 1 year I had a Harris hawk, which I flew for some period of time and hawked rabbits with it. But when I graduated, I had made a couple of applications for jobs, and I had an interview with a veterinarian from Texas who was in charge of a primate facility, Yerkes Primate Research Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I went there on a residency program. And that's when I left Libra with Mike Brewer. And I spent 2 years there, then back to Texas with MD Anderson Hospital and Tumor Institute as an associate professor of veterinary medicine and surgery. And my first year was in Baytown, which there was no way I could hawk there. So I got my bird back once I moved to the Science Park, which is also part of the UT System Cancer Center, where we maintained specialized animals for biomedical research, and including great apes, chimpanzees. And it was on an 800-acre farm with several duck ponds on there. So, I'd just take my bird to work with me, and I could keep her in my office and go flying at lunch. Or my boss he was such a great guy. He would notice that on days when there was no wind and good thermal conditions, sometimes he would just come to the office and say, "Hey, Kim, why don't you get your bird and take off?" And I would immediately leave, because
twist my arm.
Yeah, those thermal days are, few and far between, in my opinion. You always wanted to take advantage of them when they occurred.
Gotcha. Well, and so, yeah, you said you had that bird for what, 13 years?
13, yeah.
Okay. And then what ended up, kind of being, did she eventually just die of old age, or?
Yeah, well, I was in Alaska with Skip Ambrose doing some work on the Yukon River, and on the day that she normally started to molt, she fell off the block dead, just fell off. People there were, taking care of her every day, and one day they came out there to feed her that day, and she was laying under the block. So strange, but true.
That's something that is strange, though. And I don't know, you can maybe weigh on this later or now if you want to or whatever, but it is interesting. Like, falcons, more so than other species, it seems like they'll just randomly, just for whatever the cause is, whether it's an infection that goes undetected or just some other random thing, they're the hardest birds that I've noticed that to really kind of tell if there even is anything wrong, because one day you'll just show up and they'll just be dead, and like there's not really any precursor or any kind of signs, symptoms, or whatever. They're just dead one day. It's the weirdest thing. Have you noticed?
Yeah, I've seen that happen a number of times over and over, both in the States, but certainly in Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates. Captive raised as well as passage birds. I always look at the brain. I've done lots of sections on them, send them off to pathologists. I never get any real good diagnoses on anything.
It's just,
sometimes you find other things wrong with them, like visceral gout or something. That's a very common sudden death syndrome. But not very common. It's not a very common disease here, but it was over there, which relates back to dehydration and that kind of thing, kidney problems. But
gotcha. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Well, I mean that that bird lived a nice storied life anyway.
Oh, it did. Yeah,
a lot of accolades for that bird.
I mean, in order to have that kind of a relationship with a bird that up there at 2,000-3,000 feet. I mean, Jim Ince and I were there one time flying a pond, and Jim's a engineer type, and he calculated the bird was 2,000 feet in a vertical stoop. But anyway, to have a bird up with that kind of freedom, and although she wasn't what you'd call a real tame, well-manned bird, and habituated to falconry, very comfortably because she always wanted to migrate and these sort of things. But to have it to be that kind of a steady partner, day after day, year after year was just incredible, for me.
So would you say that was probably your one special, like that, we've talked about this with a couple other falconers, maybe a handful of other falconers especially, but they say that every falconer ends up with one special bird throughout their falconry career. Would you say that was your
that was certainly mine. I mean, I had lots of good birds. I think I only had one or two, maybe two bad birds, but no, I had lots of really, really good birds. But I mean, the companionship aspect of that one was just unbelievable. I had some others that were pretty good, but peregrines are the best in terms of thermal flights. Anyway, you can't take a hybrid Jur peregrine and make a real good thermal bird out of it. They just don't have that kind of wing loading and ability, and at least in my experience. But that bird, I'll just tell you this. I mean, one particular flight, I had several where she, killed birds at like ducks, like at 400 or 500 feet in the air. But one day there at the science park, I ran down there on a thermal day. It wasn't a real good day, but she went up I figured about 800 feet. And the pond was real difficult to fly. It was like 700 or 800 feet long. So when I flushed the ducks, she was about that high, not going any higher. And by the time she got down, the ducks had realized they were in big trouble. They'd flown to the north, and they turned and were headed back as fast as they could to the pond. And she hit the lead duck and dropped it. I mean, it felt like it had been shot with a shotgun straight to the ground behind the dam. And the surprising thing was the bird continued without flinching or without change of direction to chase the rest of the ducks all the way to the other end of the pond and put them in. So I ran and got to the far end and flushed the ducks again, and when she was ready, and then she put them in again on the bowl of the pond right by the dam. And so I had another 700 or 800 feet to run, and when I got there, I flushed the ducks, and she knocked down a ringneck on the other side of the pond. So walking across the dam, I thought, well, I know there's another duck that fell down there. I saw it. It fell straight to the ground and disappeared behind the dam. So I walked down below the dam we had coastal Bermuda grass. It was really high down there, and started looking for it. And then I finally found a leg sticking up out of the grass, and it was a duck leg, and I ran over to get it, and it had a band on that particular leg. I mean, which is the first thing I saw. When I grabbed it, I just held up that one foot and was looking at the band and wondering where it was banded and this sort of thing. And then I became worried with my bird because I couldn't see it up on that other duck. So I reached down to get it and stick it in my hawking bag, and lo and behold, there was not a head or neck on it. It was cut off clean at the thoracic inlet. It was a Drake canvasback, which later on, I mean, I looked at the necks, and the necks on those birds are like over an inch in diameter, It cut off cleanly, and the bird, to me, obviously didn't know that it had killed the duck or anything. I mean, it just kept on flying. Anyway, that was an incredible experience to realize that a peregrine going that fast could decapitate an inch and a half neck and drop it without even knowing, I mean, amazing.
It's science.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome though. And yeah, I wonder just how many falconers really get a chance to see. I mean, every falconer, if they do it long enough and they do it right, seems to have a handful of really memorable flights and stuff that they can recall. But, just how memorable and just how, just unique they are. I mean, it's so variable, and it's so cool to hear about stuff like that. And people get a chance to experience that.
Well, that's what you live for when you're a falconer.
It's all about chasing the dragon, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome though. Well, and so, from that, your experience then with, kind of going, back and forth between, these different places and earlier in your vet career and everything. I mean, what was the next step for you then, shortly after, working like the rehab center or breeding the specialized animals like the chimpanzees and stuff. What was the next step from that then?
Okay, so I walked into my office one morning at 8:00, and my secretary, within 5 minutes, called and said, Dr. Riddle, there's a strange man on the phone that wants to talk to you. I don't understand hardly anything he's saying, but he wants to talk to you. So I said, okay, well, I'll talk to him. So took up the phone, and it was the president of the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, which is a huge bank located in Abu Dhabi. And he told me that immediately that who he was, and that he was working with Sheikh Zayed, the president, and that he was sending a ticket over that afternoon by courier to New York City, and he wanted me to be there that next day. And next day, I said, well, wait a minute. I mean, I'm at work, I would have to go check with my boss, the director of the facility. And so I did, and he said, well, okay, go ahead and see what they want, So I left the next day, and I met this guy clandestinely in a way. I mean, I went to the room in this Helmsley Palace Hotel, and he had just told me to stay there until I got a call. So I stayed there until like 9:00 at night, and then I got this call, and the guy said, go down the elevator and get off on the second floor, then find the stairs going down to the lobby, walk to the bottom, and stay there. So I did that. When I got to the bottom, it was in the dark. I mean, it was in a dark area with a bench there.
Doesn't sound shady at all.
No one there. I thought, oh my God, here I am. And so standing there, maybe 6 or 8 minutes, and then suddenly this guy walks in, and then behind him, the Bank of Credit Commerce International president. So he had a bodyguard with him, So he told me that he was very, very polite and spoke very good English. And we sat down on the bench, and he told me that he had been directed to find a veterinarian that was a falconer, and that the president wanted to build a falcon hospital for his birds and these sort of things, and told me that, his personal wealth was like $12 billion a year, his income, and all these kind of things, and that I'd be with the royal family and be very close to the falconry with all of the members of the country, basically. Anyway, so I told him, I went back to my boss, and I told him what he wanted. He said, well, take off, So I went to Abu Dhabi. I flew over there and spent like about 18 days before I got a chance to meet the president, And when I left, I thought, well, this is probably going to be a 3 or 4 day deal. It was like 18 days later, I finally met him, and It was an incredible experience. I met him at an old palace halfway between Al Ain and Abu Dhabi, and I took a scrapbook with me with pictures of my falconry experiences and handed it to him. And I thought it was interesting that he held the book, and instead of looking at the pages in the landscape pattern, he looked at all of the pictures in there on edge. Just turned the page instead of turn the book sideways to see these pictures. But anyway, he looked at every picture in there, and then he told me to go back and design a hospital to list all the medicines and supplies and equipment that I needed, and to come back in 2 weeks. Well, it took me about a month to do that, but I went back and had another meeting with him in the same majlis. There's like 15 guards with machine guns and things, the ammunition belts crossed on their chest like they do in that kind of style. But anyway, he accepted the plan and the proposal, which is a pretty expensive one, and then told me that he wanted me to just stay and start work the next day. And I said, well, look, I have to turn in my resignation and do some things. My wife is having a baby. And I said, and then on that particular point, he said, well, I've had 19 kids, and I've never been there when the baby was born or something like that, so that shouldn't be a problem. But anyway, he set up an assistant at the local zoo to take care of his birds while I was gone, and so I ended up replacing a Pakistani veterinarian there who's been having all kinds of problems, and moved there and brought my I guess he was 4-month-old son with me, and we spent about 13 years there.
So yeah, now that you've mentioned your transition to the Middle East and all that stuff, I know that whenever we had kind of our pre-conversation about the recording, you mentioned that you wanted kind of the bulk and a big focus of this recording to kind of go back to basically log those memories, some of those experiences, and really focus a lot on the majority of your time over there, and really kind of more or less make that kind of centric to the conversation. So now that you've mentioned the transition to going over there, and I think this is the perfect time to really start the meat and potatoes of that part of the conversation then. And, just go ahead and start from the beginning of what your initial experience was like once you got over there. And I'm sure that there was some degree of initial culture shock and things, and an adjustment, in terms of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, just kind of talk about that to start with.
It was more than just a short adjustment to a new culture, because we were brought there at a time when there was nation building going on. Abu Dhabi was they were in a process of continual demolition and rebuilding of older buildings, and a lot of the streets were still sand streets. I mean, it was quite a time. I mean, a little bit of like Wild West days. I mean, people were fast drivers, and there was lots of crude behavior going on in different ways in terms of what I was used to in our side of the ocean. But anyway, falconry and the people that maintained the birds was completely different than you would expect here. I mean, probably 80% of the men were falconers there. I had to meet with the president of the country, His Highness Sheikh Zayed, many times in different palaces, and there were always falconers there. The bodyguards were falconers. All of his friends and family members were falconers, and they carried their birds everywhere. So I would enter a huge majlis, with maybe 100 people sitting around the wall. All the people, or most of them, would have a falcon on their hand, especially in the fall. It was more or less expected that if you had one, you would bring it. And so I had this Jura Peregrine, a black terrestrial Jura Peregrine that Bill Burnham had given me from the Peregrine Fund. By the way, Tom Cade is the one that recommended my name when to this Bank of Credit and Commerce president, as far as somebody that could do what they were interested in. But anyway, I would take Mohawk into this majlis and sit with other people, and I noticed that all the Bedouins looked askance at my bird, although it was a fabulous looking bird. I mean, black, just black as could be, and beautifully managed and everything. But in their opinion of captive raised birds, they were referred to as American falcons, in other words, American falcons, and that connotation was about as bad as you can get. They thought they were worthless, and they basically were worthless to them because they didn't know how to handle them and condition them and train them. But falconry to those people was a culture handed down from father to son, and there was not a lot of innovation in terms of employing out-of-the-box training or manning or handling techniques or hunting techniques. Everything was pretty much like rote memory in a way. There were people there who aspired to be different, but they weren't, close associates of the groups that I was traveling with. So Abu Dhabi is obviously in the desert, and it was very hot there. So hot that in the fall, when you would normally have passage birds, it was really too hot to do much training. I mean, you could handle the birds in the late evening, but the temperatures forbid it. And they basically only trained, very early in the morning at first, and then later on, maybe very early in the morning and just at sunset later. But their entire program had to do with manning and taming and training to come to the lure and then hunting. So that was a pretty quick process. I mean, it'd take you 2 or 3 weeks, and you would really have your bird ready to go because it was passage. They had good birds, and they were professional and very, very good at handling them and doing most things. But there were problems with some management skills, some nutritional information, and other things that I saw right away needed to be handled. And one of them had to do with bumblefoot. They didn't understand how birds got this disease, and as a result, they had lots of loss. So I mean, I immediately took that on as a challenge to attack. And started telling them it had to do with mismanagement of the bird's feet. They would block them out on rough sand, and they would bait and then damage the skin and end up with an infection. Or they would handle them on rocky soil, just stick a block in the ground on rocky soil. Well, if the bird baited, it was going to injure its feet. And their perches would not be in good repair. The top might be worn out, so they're perched on a abrasive surface that could be damaging and traumatic to their feet. So I started taking their blocks away. I mean, I would see a bad block, I'd just walk up and take it and hand them another one with AstroTurf on it. And it, ruffles some feathers from time to time, but that's what I did. I mean, I was responsible for about 100 new birds, that were the Sheikh Zayed's new falcons that year. And so I just assumed that. And pretty early on, he gave me that kind of authority. I mean, he would tell me to manage his birds. And in fact, one time there were a lot of people that weren't bringing his birds there. There were just countrymen that wanted to bring their own private birds. And finally he said, well, you can treat them free of charge, but treat mine first. Well, that was pretty simple to say, but I mean, these people were very demanding. They would come with their bird, and they didn't care whether he had said treat mine first or not, or whatever. They wanted their bird done quickly. But anyway, we managed to handle that. But anyway, one of the things that was apparent to me was that because of the heat, they weren't able to, and didn't even try really to condition their intermewed birds. And Sheikh Zayed had about 330 intermewed birds in his mews, and most of them were not used the next year because I even had Bedouins that would tell me, well, the birds are good the first year, but they're no good the second year, But, well, it's because they weren't up to snuff in terms of their physical ability. I mean, they didn't have the endurance to fly and the speed to fly and perform like the first year. So it was a huge loss. They would, as far as the resource, they would use an intermewed bird as a spotter out in the field to spot Habara, and then maybe they would even let them loose and they would fly towards that direction, but they only used them to find and locate the group, and then they would go there with passage birds and hunt them, so that they weren't used as primary hunters. So I said, okay, well, we're not going to be able to ever get captive raised birds over here if we can't even exercise their birds. So I filed that away in my mind as another challenge and thing to attack and bring forward to the groups. I think that pretty much covers, my initial work there. I mean, it was all strange. I mean, it was a strange country. I couldn't even speak in English to my boss, which I always had to work with a translator. But a really important thing happened that first year. Hard to explain, really, what did happen, except that I was in charge of building the hospital, so I had lots of details to cover in terms of the construction aspects, and again, talking a lot of times with people that didn't speak the same language. So anyway, I had lots to do, and John Houlihan, a former technician at the Peregrine Fund, and he had been actually a pre-vet student at one time, but Falconry had taken him away from vet school, actually. He was my technician there, and so he went with the hunting group to Morocco, where they would go with their new birds, where it was actually cooler and there were plenty of quarry to hunt there. He went with them, and I think he left about the first or second week in September and came back on December the 1st with that period of time being managing a falcon hospital, so to speak, in tents. When they came back, I got an emergency call from the palace to come there because there was an acutely ill bird. So I put my suit on, went to the palace, and when I got there, I was ushered in by the Chamberlain of the Presidential Court, and then also eventually communicated through the Minister of Petroleum to discuss this sick bird. The bird was in a cardboard box and laying down. It couldn't stand up. And so I went up, spoke to Sheikh Zayed, and he told me that this bird, his name was Farhan. He said this bird is the best bird of 200 of the best birds I've ever had. And he started when he was about 10 years old in falconry. And he said the bird's dying or is deathly ill. And he said, if it dies, all your medicine and all your equipment and the hospital are of no value to me. This is exactly what the Minister of Petroleum told me he said. And so he said, take the bird and give the treatment.
No pressure at all.
Yeah, no pressure. So, I mean, this is unusual to see. Well, I guess it wasn't unusual, but when you see a bird lying down in the box, it's pretty sick. You know, it can't stand up. It wouldn't eat even. So anyway, I had a black medicine bag that I had brought from the States, and I know I had some normal saline, some Ringer's lactate. I had a few antibiotics and bandages and things that the Pakistani veterinarian had let me put in that, or given to me to put in my bag. I had it with me because that's the only thing I had. All my medicine and equipment, which is, several $100,000 worth of stuff, was on the high seas coming to Abu Dhabi from the United States. So anyway, I stayed at the palace that night. I slept on a little 2-inch pad on the floor in a room in the palace with the bird right by my side and giving it fluids. And I didn't actually sleep. I mean, I pretty much stayed awake the rest of the night. But the next morning, it was still alive. So I took it and went home, put the bird beside my bed, and then called John, and we both went to town to the pharmacies. So I'd only been there 2 or 3 months. I didn't have any credentials or anything, but John and I went to 3 different pharmacies, and we just walked in and told him that we were Sheikh Zayed's doctor, that his best falcon was deathly sick, and we needed medicine. And we basically just backed these people up against the wall, and they let us walk in there, and we got a bag and just started putting stuff in it. And we took everything that looked like it could be useful in terms of treatment of a falcon and left without paying for it. I said, here, take a note of everything we've got if you have time. Otherwise, we're gone. So we left, and I started intensive care. I got some quail and blended quail. I fed quail brain and heart and liver and blood by force feeding it and treating the bird. I kept it on fluids. It was down for 2 days. Every day I had to go to the majlis and tell Sheikh Zayed what the condition was. And every time I walk up to the palace in the evening to give the report, these Bedouin bodyguards with their AK-47s and bullets and stuff would walk up to me, and they were all falconers, as I said before, but they would just say Farhan and raise their eyebrows and eyebrow and question mark, and then I would say Hayat, which meant alive, and then they would, again raise their eyebrows in disbelief almost, because they're used to seeing lots of birds die there. So anyway, this is a pattern that happened over the first 2 or 3 days, and finally, on the 3rd day, the bird ate a little bit, and the next day it stood up, the 4th day, and every day it was the same routine. I'd go to the palace, and they would always ask if it was alive, and I'd say yes. On the 10th day, I took the bird into the palace, standing on the mangala, and handed it to his bird. I don't know what the bird had. I've never seen another bird with the same disease or condition like that one. And I don't know what I did to save it.
Not a single one out of all the
No,
zillions of birds that you've taken care of. Not one time you've seen it.
No, it was totally unique, and I to this day I couldn't tell you what it had because of all the neurological signs, all the physical signs, and everything else. But anyway, be that as it may, the bird did survive, and I handed it to His Highness. He sat there and he looked at it probably for 4 or 5 minutes on his lap, sitting there on the mangle, and then he turned it around. Then he picked it up and handled it, touched it on the breast and handled it, looked at it, turned it around and around, and then finally he handed it back and he told me to take care of it. And when it was strong enough to put it in his big flight pen at the palace, and it was about 50 meters in diameter and 30 or 40 meters high, a huge flight pen, you know. So I did that, and the bird, you know, it survived. So anyway, the next day after His Highness told me to put it in the big flight pen, I met John at the hospital, which was an hour drive from where I lived. It was at the palace. But anyway, I met him there, and we were talking about the birds, about Farhan this, Farhan that, and the significance of it and everything. And then John always had a huge sense of humor. He said, "Well, Kim, we're going to have to change the name of Farhan." I said, "Oh, really? What's that?" And he said, "We're going to change the name to Meal Ticket," which it was. I mean, it was an incredible, event in the life of the Falcon veterinarian there, because it gave me some credibility that I probably didn't deserve, but that was needed because it became common for him to tell me to do things that were different than that his people were used to. And for that reason, I began to be a little bold, and I realized that all I have to do here is treat the bird like my bird and do what's right, regardless of what these Bedouins think. And because in the end, they will be happy, you know. It will improve things. So that was a huge turning point. There were many others, some other ones that I obviously needed to work on. We were still not able to handle captive raised birds, but anyway, this got us off to a good start.
So I have to ask then, what do you think would have happened, had the bird died? How I'm sure you probably thought about it many times since then, but I have to ask, what do you think? Do you think it really would have been, game over, right as far as your career over there and your experience over there? Do you think it would have instantly been over?
It could have, but I never really thought about what would happen if it died. I just had faith in God, and He was my guide, and I felt like the bird would survive, But I had another experience that I should have been fired, probably, looking at it from one point of view, but His Highness was he was understanding. I'm sure he had so many bad failures that it would have probably been more normal than you would think, but he certainly put me under pressure on that one. And that bird, I want to not forget to talk about it more, because it was a key bird over the next 10 or 12 years, for many different reasons. But I think it was just to answer your question, I think it was an act of God that the bird survived, and probably unique for that reason. I think it was just handed to me. That's the only way I can see it, because I've never seen it before or since. Like that.
Well, and that was just a huge pressure situation too. I mean, I having done what I've done for as long as I've done it, like I understand, having basically you've got this amount of time, you've got this situation. If you don't do it right, then this could potentially be catastrophic. And so, I mean, I understand the pressure situations like that for sure. But that was definitely a loaded one for you.
Well, if you start messing around with antibiotics and electrolyte therapy and things like that, I mean, you have to have some laboratory results. We didn't have a squat. I mean, we didn't have anything, including we didn't have the medicines we needed, and not knowing what you had done the next day, whether it was good or bad, except that the bird survived,
Sure.
It was crazy. It was just an artful approach to something that, was totally unknown,
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. Without the normal guidance to kind of tell you which therapy is indicated, which isn't, and all that kind of stuff, man, shooting from the hip and, from in the dark like that, I'm on top of a pressure situation. That's pretty amazing though that it turned out.
I can't prove it one way or the other, but my diagnosis was that the bird had meningitis, had a brain infection. But I don't know. I didn't have the brain to look at later on, so
or any kind of any kind of lab testing or any kind of thing to tell you otherwise. So, man, okay. Well, so once you, and out of curiosity, then too, I mean, leading up to that, and then shortly after that, I mean, you mentioned that gained you credibility and stuff. I mean, how long did it really take you overall to gain the respect and credibility that you needed to kind of be able to, to do what you wanted from then on out, do you think?
Probably about 2 years. So, but we had lots and lots. The problems were huge, and so the information had to pass from me to other Bedouin falconers, to their friends and associates and everything. And so it was kind of a slow process, because the people all thought they all think that they know how to manage disease. I mean, they still do in a way. So they all were very opinionated, and you had to change ideas and do it by example and success, So I would say within, as far as His Highness and his group of falconers, it took about 2 years. The next season, instead of John going to Morocco, I went. And we had lots of passage birds, lots of problems with coccidiosis and aspergillosis and bumblefoot and weak birds. And I mean, almost anything you can think of, we were dealing with. And so in the field hospital, I mean, I was handling things and turning them back to them, sometimes with, a flyable bird. One of the things the falconers hated to bring one to the hospital, because if I kept it there, then that meant that they didn't get to go hunting the next day or something, But they had to, because they were shake-sized birds, and they were more or less forced to come to me. But slowly I gained some credibility then, and then I went to Pakistan. Then after this initial hunt in Morocco was basically a training and entering hunting experience for these passage birds, and then the hunt in Pakistan was kind of like the party. I mean, that's when the birds were all well trained, they were well hunted, and there were lots of habara there, and there was a beautiful palace and a wonderful desert in the Thar Desert between Pakistan and India. it was a huge social and party affair. I mean, fabulous event. So there, I had some, again, peregrines one day, and one peregrine was very sick and very low weight. It was probably down roughly 25 or 30% over fat weight. But anyway, it had bloody diarrhea. I mean, it had really, really bad coccidiosis and vomiting. So, I mean, I had to always give these reports to Sheikh Zayed. So in the Majlis there in Pakistan, I went up to report on this one bird, which was kind of an important bird because the guy was important, and told him about it. And I told him it was, the weight was critically low and that it had coccidiosis. There's a term, I won't even tell you what it was, that meant it had coccidia in Arabic. But anyway, so then he asked me a question. Well, what about the weight? I mean, what should it weigh, and what did it weigh? And so I told him it was, I don't know, something like 600 grams, which is, for calidus, is, really low, female calidus. And so then he asked me to explain, and so I did. I mean, I talked about, okay, this bird, it should have weighed so much when it was trapped, the fat weight, and then when you're training and manning it, you have training weights and then hunting weights and then, so on and so forth. And then I told him what that bird weighed and how critical it was. It was down, 25 or 30% or more, probably more. It was near death. And so anyway, when I talked about that, I mentioned that there was a way to palpate the superficial fat and the condition of the bird, how fit it was based on palpation of the leg. And then that I didn't really use the leg that much. I used the pectoral muscles and the chest. And so anyway, then I told him that you could judge the condition of the bird by weight of the gram scale, which I had been talking about weights anyway, and that with a combination of physical palpation and weighing the bird and then judging the response of the bird hunting, that you could keep them fit just about every day, And so then he sat back and is on the cushion there on the floor and thought for probably a minute or a minute and a half. And then he leaned forward and said, okay, then, doctor, bring your weighing machine to the Majlis every morning and weigh all my birds, and then weigh the bird, and then tell the falconer any information that you want to tell him relative to the bird's weight and condition. Basically, that's what he said. So, and then he said, and then take some goat milk and feed this bird that I was talking about, and give it goat milk every day for the treatment, his treatment. So I was a little dismayed. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I've got to get goat milk. And then the worst thing was in the morning, we had, like 100 falconers there and 150 birds. How are we going to weigh them and do all this kind of stuff that he wants me to do? But I realized, after I thought about it a while, well, this is actually a golden opportunity, to, if I can pull this off, to teach these people some things, which is what His Highness wanted me to do. So we actually had a sheep herd, and we had a couple of camels with us for food, and we had some goats, which I didn't know we had. But anyway, all I had to do was tell the herder to bring me goat milk every morning. And I did give it goat milk one time, and then I gave it my medicine. But we had, from then on, for the rest of that hunt, we had fresh goat milk for ourselves, and we ate goat milk every day when we had rice and stuff and mixed with it. But then on the weighing, I thought about it for quite a while because these Bedouins were not interested in what I had to say, really. And if they had to have their bird weighed, they would all all they want to know is how much it weigh, and then they would run into the Majlis to sit there and watch Shakeside in the morning and have breakfast. So I finally decided, okay, I brought a triple beam balance with me, and I told my technician, I said, let's just take I had a big wooden anesthetic box that I kept my machines in and stuff. I said, let's just take that triple beam balance down there. I'll weigh every bird with a triple beam balance. That way I know what it weighs, and I can tell them what it weighs and then hand it to them and tell them whether the bird's too fat or too low or what any other information I wanted to tell them about their feathers or their feet or something else. So that's what we did. I said, look, if we take the gram scale down there with the digital information, they'll see the numbers, and they'll just take the numbers in their mind and run inside and not hear what I had to say. So every morning I weighed, 80, 90, 100 birds on a triple beam balance. And all these people, and like if this is the table that the triple beam balance is on, there would be like 15 or 20 guys, all with birds, trying to get their bird on the scale next. And so they would, as soon as one came off, I would palpate it, then hand it to the guy and tell him. And then another one was already on the scale, and I have to get it all adjusted. But anyway, things were working fairly good. Well, anyway, one guy stuck a saker down on the scale one morning there, and so I weighed it, and I told him, I don't remember what it weighed. Let's say maybe, I don't know, 700 or 750 or something. And I said, well, it's too low. It's very weak. I felt, no meat hardly on there. And so he grabbed the bird and just took off because, if they were weak, then if His Highness asked him, how about your bird, well, he'd have to say it's weak and it weighs a certain amount. And Shakeside was, he was very, very determined to follow through with all that. He would ask people sitting around there with a bird on their hand, how much is your bird weight today, and they would start talking about training weight and hunting weight, and they call it Wesna Gunness, the hunting weight. So anyway, this bird was weak, and he left with it. And I would say it was probably no more than like 7 or 8 minutes later, this bird came flying down through the crowd of people, and it was completely saturated with sand and water. It had sand and water all over, just fell all over the scale and everything else. And he told me to weigh it. Demanded weigh the bird. And so I weighed it, and so instead of 700, let's say it weighed 825 or something, So then he took it, okay, and took off with it, with a different weight. But anyway, this is just kind of the kind of things that I had to deal with, over there. And but the bottom line here is that from then on, weight became a very, very, very important bit of information on the birds hunting. And later, because it is something that is very difficult to teach someone, but I could, for instance, palpate 75 birds in probably 5 or 6 minutes and write down in my own mind, I would write down a number. I finally end up with numbers like 432 minus or plus. And I trained other falconers to do the same thing. Some of them were so good that, we might miss on 1 or 2 out of, 75 birds. It's that good a technique, but it's a very difficult one to adopt unless you feel of your bird every day and you then analyze the bird's flight and condition later on, and then the feed and so forth that goes after that. But anyway, that became another very important part of falconry that was adopted by our teams and became a part of the culture,
Yeah. So in other words, you got listened to, but
Yeah.
and so I mean, it may not have initially been kind of the the response that I'm sure that whenever you initially made that suggestion, you didn't really think that you were going to have to instantly, do that with 100+ birds or whatever. But,
No, but the good news was they started buying their own gram scales and weighing their own birds. The people like each group of falconers will have their own head guy, so to speak, or some technician that they brought with them, and so they all adopted the thing. So I didn't have to do that except for that 1 year. But I mean, that was.
Well, and before we move on to the next thing, I have to ask, like, what was the logic with the goat milk?
Well, it was a nutritious supplement that was liquid that you could give the bird, and it probably wouldn't vomit. If you give it meat of any kind, I mean, that bird had already vomited several times. When they have serious coccidiosis, the lining of the intestines slough and they bleed, and they can't process food, and so it just comes right back up. Something like goat milk is mild and can be assimilated, and it can provide some nutrition and be tolerated. I mean, it was just a crude way to. I mean, it's the only thing they probably knew is a Bedouin treatment. There's lots of treatments they use there.
Sure. Gotcha. I just, like, for my own education, I'm always interested with hearing the logic with different stuff, so.
Well, like I say, I just gave it one time. I mean, I actually, I thought in my mind, I've got to say, yes, I did give it goat milk. So
Right. So you weren't, yeah, I got you.
So that I wasn't lying.
Yeah.
And we didn't tell anybody that we were drinking it either. So that was important. There's another one. I don't know. I may be getting ahead of things here, but there were certain things that were culturally correct in the way to manage birds, and they flew them to the lure. They used feathered lures, which are the wings of habara, which, in my opinion, a feathered lure is the only kind of lure to use. But anyway, their training regimen consisted of this. They would fly it on a creance, 20, 30, 40, 50 meters. When it came to the lure, they got food. That's it. I mean, you take off, land, and feed. And then later, as they got closer to releasing the bird, it would be maybe 50 or 75 yards and maybe up to 100 yards on a line. And then they would take the creance off and fly maybe 200 meters or something and pass the lure one or two times, and they always then dropped the lure on the ground. The bird came to the ground and ate. So this is okay for a passage bird. I mean, it's already fit, but if you try to train a captive raised bird and condition it that way, you're not going to get very far with conditioning. So I think it was, well, maybe I'm getting a little ahead, but anyway, later on, I'll tell you, I trained all these people to how to pass the lure repeatedly and to offer it in the air as a target and to continue on until the bird basically had a full course of conditioning exercises before letting it take the lure. That sounds pretty simple, but it took a long time to get everybody used to doing that, and to for the people that were coordinated enough to do it to do it without causing problem to the bird, or getting hit themselves.
And so, as time moved on, then what were some of the other challenges? I mean, that you kind of had to face with different things that you were trying to implement. I mean, you kind of overcame a few hurdles, with, of course, the weight, and of course now you mentioned like the fitness aspect of things, and I mean, was there really anything else major that you had to kind of deal with initially before you?
Okay, this is a perfect time then to talk about, I think, the third year, because of some of the things that I'd been doing already. His Highness told me one day in the palace during the daytime in Abu Dhabi. He told me to go to the palace near the Falcon Hospital where he kept all of his birds, to his mews, and that I could select any of the 350, well, a little less than that, 300, let's say 25 birds that he had in the mews, and take that for my own, and then I could train it and hunt it. Okay, so that was really important, because, as I said a while ago, they didn't use intermewed birds as primary hunters. And so I, immediately, because I know that all those birds in there, every one of them was a really good bird. I went out there and I spent several days walking through the 13 different rooms looking at all these birds. And there was one medium-sized white Mongolian saker, female. It weighed the hunting weight was about a kilo. That was really impressive looking, and a beautiful physical specimen, even though it wasn't that big. And so we had a lot of Pakistanis that took care of the birds on a day-to-day basis. They fed them and cleaned the sand and took care of them. I questioned all of those people who had always been on the hunts and so forth. And they told me that one had caught 33 birds, the Havara, the first year, and had never been beaten. And so to me, that's all I needed. I mean, I said, okay, I want this bird. So I took it. One of the reasons was because it was such a beautiful, beautiful physical, and also the morphology of being so white. It was really a striking bird, and one that was fairly rare in those days. And now I don't know that you can find one like that, but supposedly from Mongolia, and the bird's name was Nahar, which meant light or white, white light or something. So anyway, I took that bird and I started flying it at the hospital every day, morning and evening, stooping it to the lure. And I took the bird to Pakistan the first year to hunt. And His Highness told me one day to take my bird. I don't know for sure if he knew which one it was. He probably had seen me, or, he knew which one I had anyway. But anyway, he told me to take my bird and go and hunt with one of his family members, a young sheikh, and to report back. Well, anyway, I went with this guy, and within the second or third flight of the day, it was my turn to hunt. So they radioed Sheikh Zayed and told him that the doctor's ready to fly his bird. So we flushed these 3 Habara, and the bird, I mean, it was just like lightning strike. I mean, it hit the bird in the air and took it to the ground. I mean, it was in tip-top shape. I mean, I'd been stooping like close to 100 times morning and evening. And it was really fit. And I mean, it just, it was just like a rifle shot. So anyway, then this young sheikh reported back to His Highness, and he said, well, how did the bird do? And he said it was brilliant, and that it took it in the air. So that was actually that was a major turning point, because from then on, I mean, it was totally obvious that, hey, there's something more here than just what we've been doing. And the fact of the matter was that I had to train that bird in full view of everybody in the camp because I could only train my bird after everybody was finished. I mean, that was my instructions. So our Falcon Hospital, which consisted of 3 or 4 tents, was always my starting point for the training evening. And I made sure that I always had a position where I had a good piece of ground out ahead of me where I could train. And, other people would train right there, right by my tent. And then when it was my turn, they were leaving the field to go pray because it was a Maghrib time, the time for prayer. So I would have maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes maximum to exercise my bird. And so I would take off running as they were walking back. I would run out there barefooted somewhere 100 meters or so away, and my technicians would release the birds, and then I would stoop that bird and others. And this bird was really a good lure flying bird too. I mean, it had great style, and put on these demonstrations. Well, that year and even years later, I would see people all over the place. They would stop what they were doing, no matter what time of the day it was. If I was flying my bird, you would see them looking up over the top of all the tents would have a little perimeter of like cane limbs and poles and, a shelter around the sitting fire but anyway, they would be looking over at watching this bird fly. So I was doing things by example, that it wasn't an affront to them. It was just like, okay, here's what this guy does, and we're watching it. I mean, it wasn't like I was telling them, hey, you're doing your bird wrong. So I mean, people started picking up doing that. I mean, I started seeing them try to, and the next year, then after that, it became obvious that there had been a major change in things, because I had gone to the offices of the now president of the United Arab Emirates to do some vaccinations and check some birds. And I went up to who later on became one of my major bosses and a great friend. And I said, look, there's a fantastic looking spotted Jur Saker sitting alone on one side of the mews. I said, what's wrong with that bird? Because I thought, well, it's probably sick or something. And so he told me that no, this bird has been canceled. It couldn't catch a bar. It didn't perform, and so the guy that had it canceled it. I said, cancel? I said, could I possibly have that bird? He said, yeah, take it. It's yours. I mean, it was a fantastic looking bird, and so I took it and I started taking it to the hospital every morning, and on the way there, my driver would stop and I would get out and let him go somewhere out into the dunes someplace, and at different areas, different places, different things, and either swing the lure or a pigeon. I mean, it became apparent to me right away that the bird was nearsighted. I mean, I could get maybe 30 meters away and it couldn't see what I was doing, but if you get up closer, I mean, all of a sudden, it popped down to the lure or something like that. So I realized that it was a German bird from some small German breeding project, and probably in a place where it didn't have the ability to see very far. So we started increasing the distances at which we flew it to the lure, and then I started throwing pigeons up on a lure line from different areas. I'd have him pop up somewhere and throw a pigeon up in the air, and then it just got better and better and better. So at the same time, I was also doing interval training and stooping into the lure 3 or 4 times in a session, and probably 8 or 10 times for each interval, giving it like 40, 50, 60 stoops to the lure. And then later on, I got it up to over 75 or so. And so anyway, I then took that bird to Pakistan that year. And then that year, His Highness told me to take my bird, he didn't know which one I had, and go hunting with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, he wasn't the crown prince then. But anyway, I went with him and sat in the back seat with my bird. And I think I told him a little bit about the training of it, but that was all. Mainly the guy in the front seat on the right side and him were doing all the talking. And I didn't know that this guy, this small man, that younger guy that was sitting there. Anyway, we got to a place where there were 3 habara, and His Highness told me to fly my bird. He said, just stick it out the window and release the bird. So I did that, but it was an odd release situation, and the bird, wasn't that good, and it wasn't like a wild bird. I mean, it wouldn't have just instantly seen a habara out of the corner of its eye. So anyway, it didn't see it, and it just flew up and circled around, and I had to jump out and bring it back down, which I was really disappointed because I was sure it would have killed the habara if it had seen it. Anyway, then he went ahead and flew one of his birds and caught one. So then he had it in his hand. Sheikh Mohammed ran out and transferred the bird and picked up this live habara and stood there telling me that, okay, doctor, get your bird, and I'm going to go out here behind the sand dune a ways off, and I'm going to release it out there and let your bird go. So he did that, and as soon as the bird took off, again, it was like a lightning strike. This bird was ready to go, and it just took the bird in the air and brought it to the ground. So I noticed that the passenger in the front seat was somewhat dismayed, I couldn't tell what it was, but it was obvious that he wasn't really happy like I was, about the event. And I found out later on, because the next year he had been named the head falconer of Sheikh Zayed's, all of his birds. I found out that he was the one that had tried to train this German bird and had failed because it couldn't see anything. So the next year, I met this guy at the hospital as soon as I came back from vacation, and he had all of his falconers met him there. They all crowded around him, and they looked at birds while he held them and stroked them professionally. The guy was a master falconer for sure. But he then came into my office, and he sat down and he handed me a camel stick, which is hanging right here on the mirror on the window, and the keys to a new Nissan Patrol. And he told me that that was a reward for His Highness's birds molting fast that year. And then he told me next that in a few weeks I would be leaving to Morocco, and I'll spend the rest of the fall there and come back in December. And that he wanted me to tell him everything I knew about falconry, but to stand behind him. Don't, in other words, be in the limelight. Just tell me what you know, and then stand to the side. Which I said, okay. I wanted to go to Morocco. I loved Morocco. It was a fantastic place. And to leave the Falcon Hospital in September, when it was all of a sudden you had 30 or 40 or 50 birds and falconers standing out there wanting treatment. So all I had to do then was hire additional people, and John was really a good technician. And I just left the hospital and went hunting with the rest of the group. That was a huge turning point, because we had 22 fresh caught Saker falcons. And so we employed the palpation, weight control, learning about the differences in food, and lure flying. And there's these guys here in this picture. We had a briefcase full of money and 3 cars and 22 birds, and then we had thousands of square kilometers of territory to hunt. Lure flying, fresh passage birds and then later on hybrids is difficult. It takes somebody that's coordinated and serious and concerned about their own health, as well as doing it correctly and not hurting the bird. But I jumped on that like a merry-go-round. I mean, I was thrilled at having a chance to train 15 birds in a row and demonstrate different techniques and ways to control fast-flying birds without getting hit, and how to stop them in the air and slow them down, and how to, judge their weight and their how to judge the end of the exercise, because if you fly a bird too much and it gets too tired or too hot, it can ruin them, to lure flying. All these kind of things were great. And as a result of that, to shorten things up here, our birds that year flew like sand grouse. I mean, every single one of them was fantastic. And we finally weeded several guys out that were trying to lure, but they couldn't, because it's just not, even the chief falconer, he never was able to learn to do that. I mean, one of the times he said, "Here, doctor, give me the lure. I want to run out there and train it." And I handed it to him. He went out there. The next thing I know, he had wrapped it around his neck, and then he hit the bird also in the air, and didn't hurt that one at that time. But, I mean, this is the kind of thing that can happen, I mean, when you're lure flying a bird. And one of the things that happened, too, was that every man flying the bird has a little bit different style. And so birds, it's like a grand dance. I mean, they know what's coming up next, and they're anticipating, and they fly that way. Well, if you change the rules of the dance, I mean, they may hit you in the air, So that was a problem we had, and I said, look, we've got to cut it down to these 3 or 4 people, because this other guy is swinging it wrong. One of them actually broke a bird's wing. And I said, we've got to cut it down. So that was a process. At the end of that month or 2 or 3 months there, I mean, to have those kind of birds perform, I mean, it was brilliant. And then, I don't know if you want me to go ahead, but I can tell you what happened the next year. With that experience, we had one major setback, and that was that they didn't plan well enough to have quail and enough quail for falcon feed on these long trips into the desert from different areas. I mean, these are like 7, 8, 10-hour drives, to certain areas, and then come back. Well, anyway, we ran out, and the birds were not performing well, and so they were buying sheep and feeding them sheep meat. And so because of that, I mean, the birds, the conditions got bad, and they weren't performing. The weight wasn't right. And so the head falconer was complaining. He said, "Look, doctor, you told me you could do this. I mean, look at what's happening here." And I said, "Well, look, you guys ran out of food. You're feeding them sheep meat, and the weights, you quit weighing them. This is the problem." So he was ticked off, but I said, "Look, if it was me, I would start shooting Moroccan hare, desert hare, and feeding them rabbit because it'll be at least better than sheep, and weigh your birds every day and let's get the weights right. So they, instead of using guns, which we had guns all the time, in fact, I cautioned them, I said, well, you can't shoot them with shotguns because they got lead pellets in there. So the result of that was we went out at night in cars, and all these young Bedouin falconers would jump out of the car barefooted and chase down hares in the lights of the cars. I mean, it was a wild experience. I mean, driving circles and racing through high grass and stuff like that. But anyway, we controlled the situation and got it back on schedule. And then I think later on we got quail and stuff. But anyway, this confirmed, I guess, in the guy's mind that, okay, well, I guess we did make a mistake. Here we really do have to weigh the birds every day and have good food. The next year I got back from holiday in August, and the head falconer again, Ahmed, told me, doctor, come here and I want you to see the birds that we're going to train this year, So I go into this big mews and walk in there, and there were 60 German hybrids and purebred captive raised birds. And I think I probably got a little bit white thinking about it because, I mean, they could just barely, fly passage birds. We had some really, really hot looking Jur peregrines, pure Jurs, Jur sakers. I mean, they were all in pretty good condition. You can tell the fitness if you palpate the chest. So I knew that, okay, this is going to be bad news. But anyway, we took those birds and managed to train all of them, have some fantastic flights. I remember one time, one of the flights went 11 kilometers with a big Jur saker, and it caught it in the, and I don't know whether it went to the ground or what, but anyway, it caught it 11 kilometers away. And we were having success on almost all fronts. That year, besides the learning and continuing to employ their skills at lure flying, we got seriously involved in entering birds to different quarry. We started out with quail, then pigeons. And these are all on Gulf's creance, which is like a running line with a swivel attached to the falcon so they can fly a straight line as far as your lure line is, and then, or as far as the creance line is, and then, and come to the quarry. Quail, pigeons, and then pheasants, and then guineas, and then ducks, and then turkeys, and then geese, and then turkeys, a sequence of entering in which these birds all had to perform without fail in order to pass the test to go on to the next level. And then the last level was a free flight at a turkey that weighed around, like, let's say 15 to 18 pounds, and bind to the back of it, and then there's always somebody close by. They would hide behind a dune or something, and they had a line on the wing so that the bird couldn't wing whip the falcon. But anyway, we would pull it down and then transfer the falcon off of that. But with a combination of the entering to these different baggies, and then the hunts were such that almost anything large running around in the desert was target. And the first thing we caught, I remember, it was we had just gotten over the Atlas Mountains and started the hunt. Within like 10 or 15 minutes, we saw a habar run up the side of a rocky ridge, and the falconer hooded off his bird, but the bird took off in a little bit different direction as fast as it could go. It took up and nailed a honey buzzard about 150 meters in the air and brought it to the ground and killed it. We had birds that caught foxes. I remember one time in an area where I ended up years later on hawking sand grouse close to where I lived. There was nothing there then except desert, but there was a group of, maybe 100 sheep and the shepherd out there, and we were releasing pigeons at the time to see what kind of conditioning it would provide for them. And so anyway, this one gerfalcon chased a pigeon into the flock of sheep, and when it got down there, it just grabbed one of the sheep on the rear end, and the sheep was just whirling around and around and around in circles, and the shepherd come running up. Oh my God, your eagle has killed my sheep, and we managed to unwind the toes from the fur. But anyway, it was bad in some ways because we also had used chickens. I forgot to mention that. We ran around to all these Bedouin camps. We'd bring maybe 5 or 6 or 8 chickens, and use them too. But the birds, sometimes they would get lost, or they would transfer off of something you were trying to do and go to the Bedouin hut and kill or grab a sheep. We lost several birds that were beat to death by the inhabitants because, the falcon had attacked their chicken or turkey. But anyway, this was where the whole thing came together, and all of a sudden here we are with captive raised birds that are primary hunters and are performing at least as well, if not better, than some of the sakers,
Well, that's good stuff. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that was very rewarding I'm very, scary, but yet rewarding to come back and see that, okay, well, they're almost listening to me like too much now,
Well, no, I didn't feel like that. No.
Well, I mean, that's good though. I mean, I'm sure that as harrowing as that probably was, I mean, I'm sure that was gratifying at least.
Because I had a mission, I mean, I'm that kind of a person. If I see problems, I want to solve them, mm-hmm. And it was just that simple. I thought, if you can't, if you're going to take, like, I think me and Dave Rimple, who was a veterinarian in Dubai, we figured there were something like 8,000 falcons, passage birds in Abu Dhabi. And this is a yearly thing. I mean, they would take that many every year, or more. And if you couldn't transition into captive race, something bad was going to happen, So this is what my goal was, And it got better, but I mean, it started off with American falcons were worthless, and then we went from that to His Highness. Like one year, the next year, he wanted to fly some wild hacked birds. So I told my friend Steve Sherrod, him and Steve Trent, about this, and we managed to acquire some space in western Oklahoma in the Black Mesa region. We built a big round pen so that we could eventually trap birds up and put them in there and store them until it was time to send them to Abu Dhabi. And we hacked basically 30 birds, pure jurs, jur three-quarters, jur sakers, jur peregrines, and hacked them from like a minimum. I think we had some minimum like 16 days, but usually around 20 to 25, up to more than 30 days for gerfalcons, wild hacked. And they were flying 10, 15 kilometers away, and I mean, they were fantastic. I got them shipped to Abu Dhabi, or no, to Morocco, directly to Morocco, which was a big deal. But anyway, we got them there, and all the falconers then, when we got them to the training place where it was where we were staying, he handed all these birds to our falconers there, and the first thing he told them to do is take the hood off on all of them, brand new, untrained, and they took them off. It was just like a huge bunch of windmills going off. I mean, and so that he was happy with that, but it was interesting. I mean, this guy would try all kinds of wild things that worked. I mean, so we trained them to pheasants. As soon as they were ready for pheasants, they flew them free without any training to lures at all, which we were surrounded. It was in like a 1 kilometer square area of basically grass and some gardens that had been used for watermelons and so forth. But then it was surrounded by cork oak forest on all 4 sides. So, an unlikely place to train birds, and certainly where you wouldn't want to just immediately start releasing them. But we would throw baggy, and they weren't just baggies, they were pen-raised good pheasants that unimpeded, they'd have guys stand out there and they'd throw it up and then unhood the bird and it'd take off and catch them. We didn't lose any birds. I thought that was pretty interesting. We did. He did all kinds of things. One time he said, look, we were using habara that were probably wild caught, and they were expensive and, somewhat rare in a way. So if you enter a bird on a wild habara, it's probably going to get shredded or injured pretty seriously after 1 or 2 entries, So I came up with this idea of putting little plastic beads on their talons, because that would at least protect them from shredding the skin, which is thin on a habara. And then we already used beak guards on beaks when birds had something they were pecking or we didn't want them to bite or whatever. You'd take a little plastic piece and make a curved guard in front of the beak, and they couldn't open their mouth and bite something. So we eventually, a combination of putting these little, the first ones we used were prayer beads, and asked the guy to give me your prayer beads. He cut it, and we took all these little expensive little beads and started putting on the talons. But I found some in the market that were little black beads or plastic, So the talons were sharp. We purposely kept them really, really sharp. I would put a tiny drop of super glue on there, turn it to the right clockwise, and stick it on each talon. And then it could, you could have it grab your hand and everything. It just felt like nubs, And then on the beaks, I cut the patch out of the eye patch out of the hoods. And so the birds could see, but they couldn't bite and they could fly, so they couldn't bite the neck and they couldn't hurt it with their talon. So we could get like 10 or 12 habara entries without much damage at all, by entering them that way. And they could hang on to them until you could get there to, transfer them and that kind of thing. They did all kinds of stuff like that.
When all you got is time, out there, and that's your sole purpose. I'm sure that the imagination was running wild.
Oh yeah, for sure. So we didn't have we didn't have any kites or anything like that. No paraphernalia like that. No, like RC airplanes, drones. That was a thing unheard of. But we still, you can. You can engage in endurance training with long luring and some interval training, but if you keep doing it very long, like I had this one Spanish guy that worked for me in Morocco, he told me one time he stooped his bird over 400 times. But what happens then, instead of anaerobic conditioning, you're getting aerobic.
Yeah.
And it's, it's okay, but I mean, it's not doing what you want. So anyway, I convinced this guy. I said, look, we were in Morocco where you had all these fantastic canyons and buttes and mesas and things of that nature. And just there, in fact, we would drive to the top of some of them in four-wheel cars and hunt from there, letting birds see from a long ways. I said, let's just put your falconers up here and let the birds fly up there. Oh, no, this is no good, I said, well, yeah, look. I told him, I said, here, we were talking about it sitting in the car, and I said, send one of them up there and let them fly up there. Let's send this one, So he did, and he sat there and watched. The bird was going up, and then the falconer was up here, and the bird kept going lower and lower and lower, and finally it crashed into the side of the slope, and he couldn't make it. And he sat there looking at it, and he said, he can't. I said, yeah, and that's what I'm saying, So then, as a result of that, we were down in the Sahara. We finally ended up camping for like 3 weeks next to a big knife-like ridge that jutted up out of the desert. It was a steep face, but there was a place where people could actually climb to the top. It was about 700 or 800 feet. I don't know. I never did check the height of it exactly, but I mean, it took them over a half hour to get up there with their lures and stuff. And they had to do it every day. But anyway, we carried up perches. Over there, they use a long perch with it's padded. It's called a shed. And we had one of them up there and several pieces of carpet. And so we'd fly them from like 150 or 200 meters in the floor of the desert up there. And then they would just, as soon as it got up there, they would give it the lure, pick it up, give it a little bit of food, and hood it. And then we would fly 3 birds up, and then they would turn around and release the 3 up there down to us down below. It was unbelievable. I mean, down there being the recipient of one of these birds coming down off of 700 or 800 feet with a cliff behind them. It was hard to see them coming, and here they were coming, I mean, at full speed, But anyway, when they got down, then we would stoop them 25 or 30 times and then hood them up. So we spent 3 weeks doing that. And one of those birds, then one day, we were hunting south of there in scrubland along the edge of it was in the Sahara Desert, but some of the time they would see something moving in the bush like a habar, and they would unhood the bird and just let it go. They did this with a 3/4 Jura peregrine that we had hacked in Oklahoma, and it took off flying after whatever it was, and of course the cars we all took off chasing. Well, it immediately became apparent that it wasn't a habara, it was a gazelle, wild gazelle running through the bush. And this bird pursued and stooped 2 or 3 times at one big one there, and then bound to it. And so it hung on, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 seconds, and then it went down to the ground, but the bird turned loose for some reason, and without missing a wing beat, it kept on flying. There was one smaller one running along beside, and it transferred to that one and nailed it. I mean, it grabbed it again by the neck, at the basically close to the shoulder. But anyway, it went down, and by that time, then our cars were up ahead of me, and they raced up, jumped out, and grabbed it, and cut its throat. And so I'm saying that because it goes back to the days that I used to look at that National Geographic magazine where they were talking about gazelle hunting and all that kind of thing. And then the Basnama, the Persian treatise on falconry, that was my Bible. That's the kind of falconry that I am. I loved it.
For the average, U.S. falconer in particular, like just being able to comprehend some of this stuff is pretty wild. I mean,
It is wild.
I mean,
It's hard for me to even, looking back, I mean, all of this stuff, I'm hitting the highlights. I mean, all these things, there are many, many layers of stories down below all those. But, I mean, if you're running around in the desert in these kind of conditions, I mean, anything could happen and did.
obviously. That's incredible, though. Well, I know I couldn't fathom a lot of those experiences. I mean, as we were kind of talking about things at dinner last night, I mentioned it's just, I feel like in proportion to the experiences that some other people have or not had, I feel pretty privileged, to have had the experiences that I've had, and seeing things in some different countries and stuff, but to live, a quarter to a half of a life, experiencing all this other crazy stuff. I mean, it's wild, but I am curious. And I know this is probably, we were kind of talking a little bit, before all this and stuff too, and some of this was going to end up probably somewhat a little bit out of chronological order just by the nature of all of the experiences and stuff. But I forgot to ask earlier, I mean, I know this is probably more relevant to earlier in your experience over there, but I mean, aside from just the normal resistance that you faced, I mean, was there any extra resistance that or any particular extra bits of even, jealousy or trying to, having to battle against extra resistance from certain people or anything that didn't really want you to succeed because they didn't want change or anything like that. And you definitely don't have to go into, super detail or, name any particular names or anything, but like I'm sure just by the nature of the beast, you had some experiences where, people didn't really want you to succeed just by the nature of the beast of it. But
sure, I understand. So actually there was a lot of resistance in certain areas. These people were only used to flying passage birds, and the captive raised bird topic was so foreign to them that a lot of the people, they just didn't want to consider it even, and some of them hated me literally because it was obvious that I had brought them there, and I was trying to do something to change the people's thoughts on the subject. And so there was some really tough resistance from some VIP people, which in a way surprised me, and it caught me by surprise, actually, because in in 3 really important hunts and birds involved, these people pretty much just snatched victory out of the face of defeat, or the other way around, defeat out of the face of victory, in which I had birds, captive raised birds, that were well known. They had seen them fly at the camp many, many times. They went on hunts with them, and on critical hunts, there were things brought to bear that resulted in instant failure of either the bird to catch a habara or to later on fly and catch another one. In other words, they were spoiled in some ways. These were serious setbacks, and they were actually traumatic psychological experiences to me. I mean, I actually felt sick several times because of the kind of ambition I had to succeed, because I knew that it would be a major conservation victory, but then to see it fail right in the face of obvious and imminent success. But there was that, but with a mission like I had, and the fact that I was, I guess, patient and also could tolerate abuse some way, I kept going, and those events occurred earlier on, and then after our experience with the wild-caught sakers, the new head falconer, and the captive-raised German birds that we initially trained there in Morocco, after those experiences, I mean, it was Katie bar the door then. I mean, I remember one time leaving Morocco, and there was a session with His Highness Sheikh Zayed sitting in a chair in in a Majlis tent. I think there are either 6 or 7 white gyrfalcons sitting on that chair, on Mangala's, either on his lap, on his hands, or on the chair. I mean, it was that, to me, that memory I have there was okay. Things are different now, and they always will be. Now, I mean, where I went from, a group of people that were probably lagging behind Western falconers in many ways, to a place now, which we can get into in a minute, which we are actually lagging behind that group because of the resources they have and the interest. I mean, it's a national passion. So there's lots and lots of passionate falconers there, and reasons to get involved and to, just reach for the sky's the limit in falconry.
Yeah, and I imagine, and we talked about it, I mean, whenever you have literally billions of dollars at your disposal, even if you start off light years behind, eventually you're probably going to catch up and then end up, quite a few years ahead of your time if you have the right if you utilize the right resources at your disposal. I mean, money is it's a great resource to have. So I imagine that there's a lot of things that they probably are ahead on now.
Oh, yeah. So His Highness Sheikh Zayed was progressive. I mean, he was a brilliant man. I mean, unbelievably brilliant guy, and a leader. And, he was an unbelievable passionate falconer. I mean, like the best I think I've ever seen. And so he wasn't obviously comfortable with just leaving things as they were. He wanted improvement, And when he saw things happening like he saw there with conditioning of intermewed birds and the training of captive raised birds and the beauty of them and their, the size of them, he just went for it. I mean, so you have to give him credit, because the countrymen there in the UAE, they love their rulers. The people loved His Highness, and whatever he was behind, they were behind. So it was really surprised me at how quickly the whole thing shifted to this kind of improved falconry.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. I mean, you have to have somebody that not only has money, but also has the right mindset and want to be progressive. I mean, you could have trillions of dollars at your disposal, but if somebody doesn't want to utilize it to move forward or grow or expand or whatever, it really doesn't matter either. So,
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's good then for all of them and the whole culture over there that they did have somebody that was in a leadership position that had the money and the resources that did want to grow in that way then.
Yeah, so. To further the comment a little bit, so His Highness is also a conservationist, and as you know, probably the Habara were decreasing in numbers in Pakistan and from that part of the world. So our new training regimens were so good that he started delaying going hunting. Like, you would go to the Majlis like at 7:30 in the morning, and they wouldn't leave till 11:30. They sit around and talk and laugh and tell jokes and just have a great time and tell stories. And it ticked off some of the falconers because they were hunters. They wanted to get out there while the getting was good, cold weather and all this kind of stuff. But then, so he just started purposefully, told to me by different people there, to delay the hunt. It just slowed down the numbers and the kind of take that was going on. And then, besides that, one of my dear friends and one of my primary bosses there was instrumental in cultivating the recruitment of serious scientists involved in captive breeding of all kinds of birds, including the habara. And when they started producing habara in large numbers, they just started doubling and tripling the breeding facilities in Morocco and elsewhere because of his passion to bring back the resource. And so that was, along with the captive raised falcons, that he started this facility in Morocco. This was a major conservation success, similar to the raising the peregrine falcon in captivity, when they were endangered. I mean, now that they were raising habara in almost like small chicken cages, like in factories where you just want to produce eggs, and throwing away eggs because they had too many. I mean, it was amazing, so plenty of habara that were pure genetic stock for Morocco, pure genetic stock for Pakistan and beyond, great. I mean, and then now that we trimmed our breeding number of birds down to producing what is needed, but only purebred, genetic, parented known gerfalcons, no hybrids.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another huge endeavor as well, which doesn't take a small amount of resources either. Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
But once again, it's a good thing that the timing, worked out on all that. It's someone's right place, right time, and can help foster changes, such as yourself. Sure. And because I mean, it takes two to tango, and if you wouldn't have had somebody in the right position available with those resources, and someone such as yourself in the right position to want to kind of help bring in and being willing to go over there and help foster change and have that degree of tenacity and patience, I guess, it wouldn't have worked. So
true. Yeah.
Yeah. But, well, and so, we touched on, the other, just the final thoughts on the adversity and everything. Is there any last thoughts or experiences that you want to touch on before we talk about the twilight aspect of the last part of your tenure over there? Or
yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about some of the last things that I was involved in there. In terms of endurance training, but before that, one real important one to me had to do with the raising of birds for falconry, and that breeding project in Morocco, in Geneva, in the Atlas Mountains, and then some of the training and conditioning things that were unique. To start off, then, I was a training supervisor for a number of years, along with being a veterinarian. I mean, that just gave me opportunity to be involved in the training methods and comments and, all kinds of things. So I retired, I don't know, 3 or 4 different times. And one time I was retired, had been for probably around 3 to 4 years, about 3 years, in which I spent all my time hawking ducks and prairie chickens, occasionally in Oklahoma. But anyway, I was with my wife. We were headed to the East Coast, and I got a call from my boss who I've mentioned before, and he said, "Ken, how are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm on the way to see my daughter in South Carolina." And so then he said, about the next thing he said was, "Ken, I need some help." I said, "Okay, well, I'm listening." And he said the name of two people that had been in charge of a program before, and I was there, and he said, "They're gone and they're never coming back." And I said, "Okay, I'm all ears," because these things that he was referring to had caused me tremendous pain. I said, "Okay, well, I'll listen." He said, "I need some help with training our birds in Morocco." And I said, "Okay, well, I would like to come then." And so I left and went to Morocco. So I spent about 3 months with the team, and in the meantime, then suddenly I started getting information about this gerfalcon breeding project. It was about 20 or 30 kilometers away from where we were training, and it had to do with the fact that they were losing about 50 breeders a year, roughly, gerfalcons and jersakers and so forth. This is a huge loss. I mean, they would just fall off of the perch, dead. And so then I found out that one of the diagnoses that had been received was amyloidosis, and they'd had several other cases of bumblefoot and then visceral gout. So then my boss started sending me all this literature. I mean, it turned out to be a stack of, a half inch or 3/4 of an inch thick of reprints about all these kinds of maladies and things that were going on. And then he told me to go there and look around at the facility. So we went over there and we picked up, I believe it was 9 jurors and jersakers for training for our group. And they were really physically poor specimens. I picked 2 birds. The first one I canceled after, I had it on my hand maybe 5 minutes. The bird baited and it just flopped like it was dying on the end of the leash. And I said, "Let me have this other one." It was kind of a white bird, and I took it and continued to work with it, although I could see that it was not that great. When we were flying them, I noticed right off the bat that all of those birds flew with their tail hanging down. I mean, it was just like at an angle, maybe, 30 or 40 degree angle, hanging down as they were flying long lure to the lure. And they didn't have any stamina, they didn't have any speed, and they were really crummy. We canceled several others. All these are from this one gerfalcon breeding facility, and the jersakers at the time, and some others, even peregrine. But I complained about this. I started looking and thinking about it, and I determined that the birds at least were probably suffering from white mussel disease, which has to do with vitamin E deficiency. And then I found out that some of the birds in the facility had died when I was there, and I went and did a necropsy on at least one of them. And it had visceral gout. And that, when you open the chest like that and look, the heart and the pericardium and the pericardial sac and the lungs are just covered with a white powdery deposit of urate. And the birds, according to the people, and then later on, I went there, and then so I saw that myself. But you could look at morning rounds, looking at all the breeders, which are like 8 or 10 breeding facilities there. You could look at it 1 minute, and 30 minutes later they would bring it in dead. I mean, it looked like it was perfect, sitting on a perch. Anyway, to make a long story short, they had chronic bumblefoot, really bad facilities in terms of the maintenance of their perches and the gravel substrate that the birds lived on, the diet that they were on, including the diet of young birds in nurseries, which were fed diseased quail. I mean, it was just a major, major problem. But anyway, at the end of this 3 or 4 month period, they called me up one night for a meeting there in the camp, and I walked in, and here's all these people from other places around Abu Dhabi, and they were all in Morocco, and it was obviously a big important meeting. So what they had actually brought me over there for was to take the job of this managing this gerfalcon breeding facility, which my boss then told me, Ken, if you can't do anything about it, we're just going to close the thing down. We're losing 40, 50 breeders a year, and the offspring are no good, basically, although he probably didn't say it exactly like that. But so then he wanted me to go to Abu Dhabi and talk with the head of the ECWP project. And I didn't want to. I mean, I said, look, I'm not a breeder. I haven't had that kind of hands-on experience. And I'm retired, Well, anyway, long story short, I went there to do it. They said, just stay until next spring. Well, I stayed it took me 4 years. In 4 years, we totally replaced almost everything in their facility. Plus, we constructed new facilities of all kinds, including breeding projects, housing, nursery, all the equipment. We replaced all the perches, all the astroturf, which is, in some cases they were setting on nothing but solid wood. We had, I think, 70 birds with bumblefoot. And this kind of condition, a chronic infection like that, was causing amyloidosis, which is due to chronic inflammation and the deposit of proteins material within the liver, heart, spleen, kidneys, everywhere, with a hyaline-like material that completely destroys the visceral organ. So anyway, this was the process that was going on. They had started the construction of a big flight pen because the ones they had been destroyed by snow. Our facility was up in the Atlas Mountains. And the flight pens that they had didn't work because when they tried to put groups of birds in there and then trap them, call them into a little room and then trap them into a small thing like about the size of this desk to train the bird to come in there and eat and then get trapped in that. Well, it's like going into a shoe box for this bird. They wouldn't go in, basically. Anyway, they had those, and one of them was still standing. I said, well, look, if you want to raise birds this way and trap them up as essentially like control hacked birds, here's what we have to do. So we surrounded this open flight pen with shade cloths so they could just barely see you coming. And then we walked to this small hut on a certain path that hid us from the birds inside. And then we took that small building and constructed a trap room that was about close to 2.5 meters long and about 1.5 meters deep, and it was like 3 meters high. In other words, a person could go in there. We had a guillotine door. We could tie all the food down inside the room, and we could trap them that way. So we went from that to me preparing a protocol of how to handle these birds so that you took them from a captive chamber and took them out of a flight pen, like 2.5, 3 months later with a bird that was physically and psychologically normal. So it's kind of important to go through this in a little bit of detail. So we raised birds. We hatched them in incubators. At 15 days old, they went to the parents. Anytime a person went into a chamber, it wore a capture shroud, which is a camouflage cloak with it was a big baggy cloak with a kind of an expanded headdress that obliterated the shape of a human form, and a mask that you could see through, but they couldn't see through it. And anytime a bird had to be handled in any way or caught, the man who went in there wore one of those. So capture shroud. And then at about 40 to 45 days of age, we took him out of there, caught by capture shroud, black bag net. In other words, a net that is made out of solid black cloth that they can't see through. So a guy would go in with the capture shroud. He would run the bird down wearing the capture shroud, put this black bag over their head, pick them up, pull up the black bag until you could slip a hood over it, and then inject the bird with a sedative, rompin. The birds were then transported asleep to the flight pen, put in the flight pen in groups of 3 or 4, given a reversal drug, and the door was raised. So they enter into a big, open, beautiful spaces with grass, perches, and flying situation. They could be observed by people inside through one-way glass, and they stayed there for about 30 to 45 days. Every day the door was raised, and they would go in and eat tied down food. They couldn't grab it and run with it because that's what they would want to do. So they had to go in this chamber, eat there, and then leave. So we could have 15 or 20 gyrfalcons all eating in a row of 4 rows of tied down quail. Once they finished and left, then we lowered the guillotine door. At 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the door came back up and they went back in for an evening meal. So this is the whole process. Without seeing anybody, we had baths in there, everything, for 45 days now, plus whatever they were time in the chamber. Still naive birds. I hadn't seen people. So the day that we caught them, then we held the food back a little bit the day before, so they were a day and a half or so hungry. We would let 2, 3, sometimes 4 birds into the capture room, and then while others are standing out there wanting to come in, we'd lower the door slowly and trap them. And as soon as the door went down, the light went off, and they were in total darkness. Then we walked in with wearing night vision goggles, and you could just walk around among them. And we had little short-handled black bag nets that we could and they were weighted, so you could just walk over and just drop one down on this bird, walk over and drop down on that bird. And then once we had them all in the net, then the light would come on and the people would come in there, and our helpers, and we would raise the black bag up, put a hood on, give them the tranquilizer sedative, and take them in the processing room and put jesses on them and vaccinate them, give medicines and that sort of thing, and then transport them to a clinic where they were sealed. Every bird was handled this way. They were sealed, and then as they then recovered in another room, a big, huge room where there's lots of perches in there, and they would either wake up on the hand of the falconer or on a perch, which our people were walking around touching them and talking to them and making noise and handling them in some way so that even though they're awake, they're unsighted, they can't see anything, and that's the way they're handled then for the next 3 days. During that length of time, the eyelids droops because it stretches, the skin stretches a little bit, and on the 3rd day or 4th day, depending on the bird, because they're all, by that time, they've been handled 24 hours a day by these falconers, they're taken into a room that's a little bit darkened, and the bird is sitting on the mangala with some meat, and it's hungry, and so it starts to eat. It takes a couple of bites. They take the hood off. It's already, you could call, broken to the hood. It's been hooded and unhooded 1,000 times, sealed. I mean, they take the hood, just like it, put it on a pair of socks. And another man sitting like as far from here to me to you, 3 or 4 feet away, 4 or 5 feet away, sitting with a piece of meat on his mangala, just sitting there silently, waiting. So I had my technician walk up behind and reach down and pick up the silk end of the suture that's holding the eyelid closed, and just pull it up because I left them long, stick the scissor under and snip it and pull out the thread, and just in a split second. And so the bird then, his eyes are open. It usually startled them just a tad bit, but then they immediately go to eating again, and then the falconer would conceal that piece of meat and it's standing there without food. And then the man sitting right there would make a noise or wiggle the food on his mangala. They would jump to the mangala instantly. I'm very seldom failed to come quickly. And the birds, I mean, it's amazing. The birds were absolutely, totally, and completely naive. They could resist. They would demonstrate aggressiveness and fear and a fighting attitude if they were hooded. I mean, because they didn't know what was happening. I mean, because they hadn't been handled that much. They might. I'm talking about at first, not later. After they're jumping to the hand like that, I mean, the birds are almost. Well, they're ready to eat outside. And the next day or two, they're ready to fly to the fist. And a day or two later, they're coming to the lure like 40, 50 meters, So the point of this discussion here has to do with the way birds are handled as young birds or as initial caught birds is very, very important. I've seen many cases of a man, for instance, one time a master falconer. I mean, the best hooder I've ever seen in my life, the best manning professional I've ever seen, make a small bobble with unhooding and then trying to hood his gerfalcon because he didn't seal it. And I told him, you have to seal that bird. Anyway, he didn't seal it and he screwed it up. That one time, that bird became hood shy. He had worked for weeks on it to get it back. That was one simple screw up, And so compare that to birds that we got hundreds, literally, from other breeders around the world and around Europe and so forth that were handled differently, that were completely different. One time we woke a group of birds 22 days straight without sleeping. And we had our people work around the clock. We do things like take little vegetated fronds with leaves on them, dip them in water, and just walk by all the birds and touch them. If they looked like they were even thinking about going to sleep, doing something to wake them up. And even after that, those birds were, they were nervous in the car, and some of them were canceled because of that, because the way they were caught, to go to one other step, was they were in a big flight pen. They hosed them down with water way up in a high, it's like 30 meter high flight pen, and ran around and caught them with regular fishing nets that the birds could see you coming. Here they're wet, muddy, and chased down on foot. And that's the kind of difference you see between the two processes. So my main point to make here is that it really irritates me when I see people trap birds and then display them unhooded, with showing them to people, holding them like ice cream cones, and doing different things like that when they're first trapped. If they only knew what kind of a setbacks, it depends on the bird, but some are better than others. But it's a huge mistake, I don't know why people do that. But anyway, it's a pet peeve of mine, because for one thing, I don't think American falconers really know how to physically restrain birds that well. And unfortunately, we don't have the ability to use tranquilizers routinely like we do there. We never handle a bird. Any bird that's under training is always tranquilized instantly before doing anything, like before giving a worm medicine, before putting on a tail mount, or being transferred to a shipping box or whatever. That's because you spend a lot of time manning them, and then if you just manhandle them without care, it's a big setback every time, So as many times as we handle birds there, they're like from Morocco to Pakistan, Morocco to, Timbuktu or wherever, many different places. Plus all the vaccinations and wormings and handlings and feather repairs and all. It's just something that has to be done, and the birds don't remember these physical assaults at all. They don't remember. It's dose dependent, so you can give a dose so light that you could just walk up and look at a bird's eyelid with it standing there, and like 10, 15 minutes later, it's wide awake again and unfazed by these kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just one of the things I wanted to bring forward, because it's a totally different way to handle birds,
Sure. And yeah, it's a very good point in that, that's another thing that I've discussed with other friends of mine too, is how much we really do set ourselves back when we do trap and other stuff, not taking simple precautions, even something as simple as holding a sheet up in front of us, or, something just to kind of, obstruct the association of the experience with us, or whatever the case is. It really does. We really do set ourselves back a lot. And I think there's not a single one of us, for the most part, or the majority of us, I should say, for the most part, that haven't been guilty of it. It just, sometimes you get caught up in the moment, and other times you just don't know any better, but it is a good point. We do a lot to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah. And there's people that have good reason to say, well, it doesn't really matter. I've trapped wild peregrines and not sealed them. But peregrines are probably the best ones to not seal,
Mm-hmm.
It's totally different depending especially on captive raised birds. Wild trapped birds, it's just, this capture shock, it's just a momentary thing, as long as you don't prolong it by showing everybody the bird unhooded. But I think it generally doesn't cause a problem. But captive raised birds are different, and if you trap prairie falcons, you should seal it, and should be handling it the way I just described. But there's ways to do it, but they're just much harder on the falconer and the bird.
Well, and you wrote an article about sealing in particular. I mean, just touching on this particular topic real quick before we move on to the next thing. You did write an article about that, right?
Right.
And is that something that people can
it's
easily
in
access?
The Hawk Chalk. It's, if you read it in detail and you see, it's really a comparison between two ways of doing things. And, I've had many veterinarians and other people, falconers too, that have poo-pooed sealing, and once they see what the result is, they will never go back. So, the bottom line is, it does help the falconer, but it's the best thing for the falcon's psyche, because it's a gradual transition into being a captive companion.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I guess to more or less kind of cap the sentiment on that particular topic, we can probably just leave it at, if people want to form their own opinion or whatever, they can read the article, or if you want to go into it more, you can. But I know that's something else we discussed before. We started doing this too, is that, it's kind of like you said with the sedative aspect of things too. It's like we can talk about a lot of different things and what works better and what doesn't. But unfortunately, with the resources we have and stuff, it's not an easy thing you kind of reconvince people or re-implement, so, but,
yeah. So anyway, enough on that. So,
so yeah, if you want to read more about sealing and form an alternate point of view on that, you can read the article.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and so transitioning from that, then, are you ready to talk about the kind of the end of your tenure and leading into your official retirement, or?
Right. So in my book, I wrote a book on conditioning captive raised falcons. I purposely didn't put anything in there on RC airplanes and drones, because I had plenty of experience with drones over there. We used them we would put drones and balloons. I mean, we'd hang numbers of lures on balloons and fly birds on drones, but they weren't, except with the balloons, they weren't the rest of the training on drones and RC airplanes had to do with conditioning, not and also on release. So a release of quarry. So we first employed octocopters to take Habara in a box up at altitude, and it varied anywhere from like 200 meters up to 1,000 meters high. And this is late in their training before the hunt, but the box had a bottom that dropped out with a remote control, and a fully flighted Habara would be there to fall out at 1,000 feet, well, more than that, 2,000 feet sometime. And falcons then, the gerfalcons were released from the car window, unhooded and released to search the sky and find this Habara up there flying away from the drone. And the drone would immediately leave the area and come back down to a lower altitude and get out of the way. But once the birds spotted the Habara, then these chases would last 3 to 5 kilometers. This obviously would be after they're fully trained and entered on Habara. The conditioning that went into that phase had to do with RC airplane training. And that is an unbelievable best way to condition birds. I mean, it's an incredible tool and easy to do in terms of entering any bird. My Ger peregrine tiercel that I had flown, I think it had been hunted on sand grouse 4 years before I ever let them talk me into going ahead and entering it to the drone. But because it was, I mean, I like to lure fly and train birds another way, but the ability to take a bird that's already fully conditioned and trained to long luring and interval training, and then transfer it to a lure trailed by RC airplane is just like leaps and bounds better. I mean, the first time they see it on the first flight, the bird will fly two minutes, flat out trying to catch it. And so we trained all of our birds on drones. Some of these later into the winter with gyrfalcons would take them up 2,000 feet high and big loops in the sky, chasing all over the sky. The flights would last 6, 7, 8 minutes, 9 minutes maybe. And it's like, I mean, it's almost better than hunting because we had professional pilots that flew the drones, so they were actually expert at. One of them was a falconer himself, a Pakistani, and he could do things with his drone that you couldn't believe, and he understood everything about the conditioning of falcons because he was a falconer. But to compare the kind of conditioning that provided with lure flying, which I said I preferred to do, I think it was maybe the last year I was there or the next to the last, I chose not to fly my bird to a drone that first year. I went to Pakistan or to Morocco and picked up the bird, and I flew it for 3 weeks, 21 days to the lure in multiple sets of interval training. I don't remember, something like 30 stoops and then 5 minutes rest, another 30 or 35, 5 minutes rest, and then maybe 40. And I did that 2 or sometimes 3 times a day for 21 days. So this particular day, I wanted to compare the bird's fitness with what it could do against the drone, because 2 years before it had been flown on drones, and it was loved it. I mean, they all love it. I mean, it's something that they really enjoy, if you can imagine a bird enjoying something. So John Seabury, an American from Wyoming, was there. He's also a breeder, a Habara just, I guess, his specialty was incubation of Habara eggs. But anyway, he was there, and he's also a falconer. And so he told me he had never seen a bird fly the drone. I said, well, let's just fly mine because I want to see it fly the drone today. So I said, I'll let you release the bird. He hadn't seen the drone for 2 years, but all you have to do is just hold him on your hand hold the jesses in your hand. Don't let him loose until you've got him unhooded. But as soon as you unhood him, just turn it loose. So they started the drone up, and this guy that was the pilot that was flying the bird that day, I'd never had him fly my bird. The other man wasn't there, so he started the drone up, and it flew within maybe 75 or 100 meters, and the bird started pumping its wings instantly. We used RC airplanes with electric motors, They don't make a real loud noise, but a whining noise, you know. And when the drone came by 50 meters away, he unhooded it, and the bird took off like a shot. The bird flew a little over 9 minutes, like 9 minutes and 10 seconds, without stopping. And I tried to get the pilot to bring him down a couple of times because he went way over what I was anticipating he could do. But anyway, the bird went 9 minutes and 10 seconds flat out flying, and with 3 weeks training out of the breeding pen, out of the molting pen, which to me was a pretty astounding. I mean, the bird was up, I think, I can't remember, right around 300, let's see, 300 to 400 meters height was the highest it went. We flew them with, transmitters and all. But anyway, that was just a note that has to do with the RC airplane, which I really wish we could do here. I mean, I tried to even talk my boss into sending this guy over here to do something at the NAFA meet, but I mean, you would have to bring birds and so forth that are already ready. But anyway, it's something that American falconers should really pursue hard, because it's it's an incredible training tool.
Yeah, and I've seen, similar other, tools to that end also. I mean, yeah, the drone took off big over here, but I mean, like in the UK, I mean, they use like the row crows and stuff like that as well. A lot of similar types of tools, whatever works. You know what I mean? So,
well, it's just a little expensive. I mean, I remember talking to one guy in Dubai that I first saw fly drones, and I asked him if he ever crashed one, and because he told me that he had won a couple of Land Cruisers and the speed training, with Falcons, and he said, he smiled real big and had a gold tooth right here. Smiled real big and said, "Yeah, many." And he said, "I took these cars and sold them, and I bought all RC airplanes and equipment with what I sold those cars for." Well, anyway, so that has to do with the conditioning. So my last comments then had to do with my last days there. I finally was able to leave the breeding facility with birds that were there were second to none when they were handled that way and trained, flown in flight pens and then handled that way. I mean, they were fantastic, and then conditioned in ways I've already discussed. So I still had the Falcon training supervisor to fall back on, which that facility was only like 30 minutes away from the breeding facility. And by that time, things had progressed to the point that they really didn't need anything that I had to say. The people were more knowledgeable, and actually they had more hands-on experience than I did at that point. And I had tried to not fly my Jura Peregrine Tiercel that I bred there at that facility, and I trapped him out of the flight pen because a jerkin was trying to chase him down and kill him. But I tried not to fly him on sand grouse because I knew I had like several years of really hard work to try to get the place in shape. But there were sand grouse, black-bellied sand grouse all around our facility, and huntable populations within 30-minute drive in all directions. So my boss had a sand grouse challenge in an area about a 3 or 4 hour drive from there, and he wanted to let some of the Arab falconers fly a bird there. And I said, well, my bird, I trained my bird to wait on with the lure. I mean, it would go up about 500 feet with us rewarding him with a thrown out lure. And, and it was, well stooped to the lure as well. So I said, okay, well, just take my bird. So they took it and kept it for the hunt. And without any entering, that bird had only had 5 pigeons total out of several months of training. And we flew it at one. I was down there then. They flew it at one racing homer, and it chased it several kilometers all over the sky, and finally caught it. I thought it had gotten away. They kept it there. I left, and so it came close to. I mean, it made contact with a black-bellied sand grouse on one of the several flights they had, and they said, "Man, this bird is, it's ready." It naturally went for sand grouse, and it was well trained enough that it was perfect, ready to go into something really good. So my Spanish breeder there said, "Look, just start flying it on the way to work." So I did. I started hunting, and that experience for 5 years in a row, where basically I could go to work, I could drive to work and run by and check and see if everything is going okay. And then I spent my time hunting black-bellied sand grouse 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. And they were incredible flights. The black-bellied sand grouse is, everybody that I've talked to that have flown them have referred to them as the ultimate quarry. And I realized that they were, because I'd tried to fly them, but with my Gyr Peregrine, my black Gyr Peregrine, 15 or 20 years before. But I think, okay, this is it. This is going to be my last days of falconry, because of my age and everything. And you can't do this anywhere else in the world, really, except Africa. And even in Morocco is protected unless you had special permit. So I hunted, and it's an incredibly challenging and difficult quarry, and the birds are so well camouflaged that you're hunting something that looks like a stone in a stony or sandy desert. It's hard to find them, and even when you find sand grouse, you can have perfect slips. The birds have to be up, let's say at least 250 to 300 meters high, and then in front of you in order to have a chance to get down and hit one before they zoom away. They're just like fired from a rocket, And they have real bony backs, and they can take a hard hit, and then they also had about 3 evasive moves, so difficult, the whole thing. But anyway, I spent 5 years hunting them, and I figured from year to year about how many flights I had. It was somewhere between like 600 and 700, or possibly even more flights. I caught 65 out of that, and they were wonderful flights, So in the end, looking back, at my life, like 75 years ago, there's nothing that I had left to do, Everything, all those dreams I had looking at those National Geographic magazines, everything on those pages just leaped out and became reality experiences for me. And I didn't, it wasn't like I just raced around trying to find these kinds of things to do and trying to, like get on the list so that I could get this application or do this thing. People just came to me and offered it up, So I just go back and think about the fact that I was kind of a rebel rouser and an unruly kid, and I got in a lot of trouble as a young teenager and things. And my parents were very religious, so I actually rebelled from that because it was a real strict thing that was out of the box as far as my box is concerned, you know. Nothing really seemed to mesh with me as a youngster. But anyway, I just looking back and all those things became reality. And I just had to, not too long ago, think that, you know, I really believe that God provided this whole thing for me. And, you know, I'm just really blessed, and I'm glad that I can share these experiences, not because I think everybody's going to have this kind of experience, but if you keep falconry in the proper perspective, unlike what I did, I mean, I've pretty much sacrificed everything. I've divorced twice and lots of other problems, you know. But somehow or other, in the end, my passion for falconry probably saved my life, you know. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak these kinds of things. I mean, never have done that before, so take it for what it's worth.
Well, no, I mean, it should be me that's thanking you, and I always try to thank everybody, you know, that gives me, you know, if there's one thing that I've learned, you know, in my short, almost 42 years, you know, on this planet, is that time and respect, and, you know, there's a couple things that mean more than anything, at least to me, and time is right up there. And anybody that's willing to give me 3 to 4 hours out, you know, and even out of their life, it means a lot to me. So I mean, I know it means a lot to other people too. That well, I mean, there's going to be plenty of people, and there's going to be billions of people on this planet that's never going to be able to experience this kind of stuff. The only way they're going to be able to experience anything like this is by listening to people like you know, or other people. And so, you know, I mean, it means a lot to people. And, you know, I appreciate your willingness and finally being worn down enough and bullied enough and into submission, you know, to finally, you know, say yes to doing it. And I hope that you've had a good time sharing this stuff. I mean, if nothing else, I'm sure it brings back some nostalgia for you and some good memories, and also some probably not so good memories too. But
yeah, all those things. You know, it did take a little bit of arm twisting, but anyway, I'm glad I did, and it's you know, it's just telling it like it is. I mean, this is my story. It's different than everybody else's, but it's probably worth paying attention to, and maybe there's some jewels of information along those lines. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is there any other, I mean, just to end on a note that I usually end on, I mean, is there any, I mean, you've already imparted lots of great stories, you know, and some good advice in this, but is there any other last piece of advice or any last sentiment that you want to leave before we call this good?
Well, so laying right over there is a book. It says A Collection of Life Stories. I wrote that for my grandchildren because these stories that I just told you are different than those stories over there. Mm-hmm. But they are all part and parcel to the same story, the overall story. And there's still another one that's even hairier than the ones I just described that I probably shouldn't tell anybody. But anyway, with you know, with the experiences I've had, you could probably read between the lines and imagine some other adventures that went along with desert four-wheeling, you know.
For sure, yeah. You shared a couple of insights of a couple of those last night at dinner, and I know my mind was blown. But you know, once again, getting back to the main thing, It's important that guys like yourself kind of share and pass on experiences and things that other people can learn from. I mean, whether or not people ultimately want to learn from them, it's their decision. But
sure,
I think that in the end, there's going to be a lot more people that are going to want to listen and learn from other people than the latter. So.
Well, if they're interested in the details, I mean, I did write a book on training captive raised birds, and it has very little to do with hunting, but if you can condition them, then you can hunt whatever you want to train it on,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, it's out of print, but if you happen to have a chance to get one, I mean, there's lots of good stuff in there. So it's a blending of all the good aspects of manning and taming, which the Arabs are masters at, unlike anyone else. And then it's got a lot of the things that are brought about by the Persian treatise on hawking, and some other things in there on Western falconry techniques that are worth looking at, especially the conditioning stuff is really of value,
And the official title of that book is, in case people want to try and find it, even though it's out of print.
Well, it's The Art of Falconry from Arabia Westward, Training and Conditioning Captive Raised Birds.
Okay.
Falcons. That's it.
Is your lower back and butt hurting extraordinarily bad at this point? We're almost 3.5 hours in, Ken.
Actually, it's way better. So if you happen to see my chair, I've got air cushions and everything taped to it in exactly the right place. Otherwise, I couldn't have done it. I mean,
yeah. Well, once again, 3.5 hours almost. We're getting ready to hit almost that marker, and I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen. And I know my butt and lower back's starting to get sore, and I've got 7 hours of driving left to do after this. So,
no, I'm happy. I mean, I think it was. I'm glad we did that, and it went faster than I thought. I mean, we were able to cut some corners.
Yeah, well, and who knows? I mean, whatever, whatever willing, maybe we'll get a chance to expound on some other stuff if there's time in the future. But man, thank you again so much.
Okay,
and I really appreciate your time. And happy retirement, man. You've earned it.
Well, thanks for setting it all up. I really did kind of enjoy it.
You did, for what it's worth. You did great. I know you were reticent about it, but you're more of a natural talker than you give yourself credit for. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.